300 heroes, 300 legendary companions, dragons, archangels, knights of pure light. And yet his companion is a trembling elf whom the summoning hall itself called trash. Numbers hover above her head, and he sees them just as clearly as he saw the tables in the game editor 3 years ago. And he realizes he can change them. Cold marble strikes Siwoo in the back so hard that the air is knocked out of his lungs. He opens his eyes. Above him floats a stone vault the size of a football field, and glowing runes flow across it. He is lying down. Hundreds of people stand around him, and a creature glows beside each one. A dragon with 10-meter wings, a knight with a sword of light, a woman with 6 wings and eyes of liquid gold, 300 heroes and 300 legendary companions. And next to him, a skinny girl in a linen dress trembles on her knees. Silver-green hair, pointed ears, a wooden staff pressed to her chest. Numbers hang above her head. Strength 3, Spirit 6, Luck 1. And Siwoo forgets to breathe, not because the numbers are low, but because he sees them just as clearly as he saw the stats tables in the game editor 3 years ago, where he tweaked sword damage and rewrote experience curves before every patch. A voice from above calls him the last chosen hero. It names his companion, Leanne Everfall, a third circle novice, an unranked healer. And the hall laughs. Someone asks why waste a summoning slot on a peasant girl. A man in golden armor looks down at Siwoo and shakes his head. The look isn't malicious. Worse, sympathetic. Siwoo sits down, looks at his hands. Skinny fingers, a callus from the mouse. He looks up and sees his own stats above him. Strength 2, Mana 0, Luck 0, Spirit 9. He blinks. The numbers don't disappear. Any peasant could kill him with a single punch. In his career, he created characters like this himself, for testing the lower limits of balance. They were called trash dummies, and now he himself is a dummy. A living one, in a foreign world. The girl sobs. She says she knows, that he wanted a strong companion, that she's so sorry. She utters every word as if apologizing for existing at all. And Siwoo thinks about the numbers above her head. A spirit of 6 is abnormally high for a novice, but someone has slotted 3 points into her strength. A healer. In power. It's like pouring intellect into a melee warrior. It's wrong. It's pointless. And he mentally reaches for that 3. The number responds. It lights up. It becomes active, editable. Like a cell in the spreadsheet he'd opened 5 days a week for 3 years straight. He snatches his thought away like a hand from a fire. His heart is pounding. He lowers his eyes to the floor. No one noticed. Everyone is staring at the dragons and archmages. And then it hits him. He can change other people's stats. He can edit people. And no one must find out about this. That same night, the Council of 7 passes its verdict. The old man reads the line. The hero's companion does not meet the minimum requirements. The hero is classified as unfit. The abyss is advancing. Every able-bodied person works on the front lines. Spending resources on a pair with no combat potential is wasteful. And Siwoo stands and calculates. No emotions, just numbers. The old man in the center has luck at 0. 0 luck for someone who makes strategic decisions. The advisor on the right has strength at 16 and spirit at 2. A general without the ability to understand people. A tyrant's build. The advisor on the left has dexterity at 11 and endurance at 1. One hit and she's dead, a glass cannon. All the stats are off, every single one. The entire This World is a poorly balanced game with a broken meta, and these people have just written it off as junk. The old man finishes. A daily ration, a map, the right to leave on her own. In the hallway, Leanne finally cries, covering her mouth with her hand. Siwoo doesn't hug her, doesn't comfort her. He asks one thing. Can she keep secrets? She looks up with tear-filled eyes. She was expecting reproaches. She expected him to say it was her fault, but he asks about secrets. She nods. They are put up for the night in a servant's room. In the morning, they'll be kicked out the gate. They have one night. Siwoo sits on the floor across from her. A candle burns between them. He asks her to hold out her hand. He reaches out with his mind to her stats. Numbers flash. He takes a unit from strength and moves it to spirit. Lien shudders all over. She says she felt warm water flow from her heart to her fingers. A golden glow flickers around her fingers. It wasn't there before. He explains briefly. He can see her numbers. He can move them from column to column. He can't create new ones. He can't increase the total, only redistribute what's already there. She asks if he can do this with anyone. He shakes his head. The guards' numbers in the hallway are visible, but gray, locked, but hers glow. Because she is his companion. A bond of summoning exists between them. But access isn't automatic. When he moved that dot, he felt he needed her permission. Not verbal, deeper. Her very soul must say yes. And she did, because she trusted him. Lien is silent for a long time. Then she says she's afraid. But she's been afraid her whole life and has grown accustomed to it. And that she'll keep the secret, even under torture. Because in 20 years, he's the first to ask her name before looking at her numbers. In the morning, they're kicked out of the gate, literally alone. A guard pushes her in the back and drives her south. Lien walks silently with a blank expression. Siwoo knows that face. He's seen it in the mirror every morning for the past 3 years. The face of a man who has decided that he is worth exactly what is written in the salary column, or in the strength column. They walk for 3 hours. By the stream, he sits down on a rock and asks what she wants. Not what she can do for him, what she wants. She is silent for a long time. The wind ruffles her hair. Finally, she says quietly that she wants to heal someone one day, so that the person becomes better than they were before the injury. Not just survive, become better. And Siwoo opens her stats and sees what he didn't see yesterday. A hidden line flickers beneath the main numbers. Regenerative resonance. The ability to restore the body not to normal, but to perfection, to what it could have become without illness or injury. A legendary level talent, locked away, buried so deep that no mage would have spotted it. Who hid it, or simply didn't know it existed? He shifts another point from strength to spirit, and then reaches for the hidden line. And something clicks, not in his head, in the air, like a lock opening. A new field appears before his eyes, the evolution slot. Empty, waiting. And he understands. The slot didn't open because of magic, because of the truth. When she first spoke her true dream aloud. He puts 2 points into the slot out of nowhere. He doesn't know where they came from. They're just there. As if the system had rewarded him for asking and hearing the answer. Lien cries out, not from pain. A golden light flares up in her palms, warm, alive, pulsing in time with her heartbeat. She raises her hands and looks at them. This light is unlike any magic she's ever learned in work. Deeper, stronger. She turns to Siwoo, tears in her eyes. But for the first time, they are different. He allows himself a single second to simply gaze at this light. Then he stands up. He says that a few days' journey away, there is a small town. There is food and shelter there. And surely there are sick people there as well. And he wants to test what Lien is capable of now. The town was called Vern. 120 houses, 1 tavern, 1 temple, 1 well in the square. Siwoo and Lien reached it on the 4th day of their journey. The flatbread ran out on the 2nd day, the dried meat on the 3rd. For the last 24 hours, they'd walked on water from streams and sheer stubbornness. Lien walked in silence. Siwoo noticed she'd stopped apologizing. Not because she'd stopped being afraid, but because she was too exhausted to waste energy on words. Vern greeted them with the smell of manure and smoke. There were no guards at the gate. There was no gate either. Just 2 crooked posts and a rope between them. Siwoo stepped over the rope and looked around. The stats of the people around them were typical of a rural backwater. Strength 3 to 5, endurance 2 to 4, spirit almost universally 1 or 2. Not a single person above average level. The tavern stood in the main square, 2 stories high, with a cracked sign on which a crooked boar was drawn. Siwoo pushed open the door. Inside, it smelled of beer and sweat. Behind the bar stood a woman in her 40s with a stern gaze. Her stats were not bad for a tavern keeper. Strength 5, endurance 6, spirit 3. She looked at Siwoo, then at Lian, then back at Siwoo. She asked if they had any money. Siwoo said no. She pointed to the door. Siwoo said his companion was a healer, and that if there were sick people in town, she could help. In return, they only needed food and a place to stay for the night. The innkeeper smirked. She said they'd seen healers around here. Traveling priests charge 3 silver coins for laying on of hands and leave before it's clear whether it helped or not. But then her expression changed. The smirk was gone. She said her son was sick, 3 months, a fever. Doctors had come twice. The first said it was because of the boy's low constitution. Just 2. A weak body can't fight off the illness. The second said the same thing in different words. Both took the money and left. She looked at Lian with an assessing gaze. She asked what her rank was as a healer. Lian lowered her eyes and said she had no rank, that she was a 3rd circle novice, that she hadn't even finished her training. The innkeeper shook her head, but then she looked at the staircase leading to the 2nd floor and said that if the elf could at least bring down the fever for 1 night, they could stay. The room upstairs. The boy lay in the small room under a thin blanket. He was about 8 years old. His face was red. His forehead was wet. His breathing was rapid and shallow. Siwoo looked at his stats. Stamina 2. Spirit 1. Strength 1. The boy was at the lower limit of viability. With stats like that, any serious illness could kill him within a month. It was already a miracle that he had held on for 3 months. But Siwoo saw something else. A line that no one else could see. A hidden status. Stunted growth. The boy's body wanted to grow. It wanted to develop. But the illness held him back like an anchor. Every day he spent in a fever robbed him of his potential. 6 months of growth had already been lost. He turned to Lian. She was standing by the bed, looking at the child. Her hands glowed faintly. Not strongly. Barely noticeable. A golden glow on her fingertips. She couldn't control it herself. The light simply appeared when a sick person was nearby. Siwoo quietly told her to try. Not to treat him as they'd been taught in the monastery. Not to perform the standard blessing. But to do what she had said by the stream. To heal him so that he would be better than he was before. Lian looked at him. There was fear in her eyes. She said she didn't know how. That she had only been taught basic pain relief. That she had never healed anything serious. Siwoo sat down next to the boy's bed. He looked at Lian's stats. Spirit 8. Evolution slot active. Regenerative resonance unlocked. Everything was in place, only one thing was missing. Confidence. He told her he wouldn't explain how magic worked. He didn't understand it himself. But he knew one thing. Her talent wasn't in relieving pain. Her talent was in giving people back what had been stolen from them. The illness had stolen 6 months of this boy's life. Lian could give them back, not because she was strong, but because that was exactly what she wanted to be able to do. Lian knelt down by the bed. She placed her palms on the boy's chest. She closed her eyes. Siwoo saw the numbers on her interface flicker. Spirit 8 began to pulse. The evolution slot lit up, and light poured from her palms. Not a faint glimmer like before, a full stream of golden warmth. It enveloped the boy like a blanket, penetrated beneath his skin, spread throughout his body. Siwoo saw the child's parameters begin to change right before his eyes. Stamina 2 flickered, became 3. The hidden status, stunted growth, began to fade. The line paled, dissolved. The boy took a deep breath, his first normal breath in 3 months. His face flushed pink, not red from fever, a normal, healthy pink. The fever was receding, not gradually, instantly, as if the illness had simply evaporated. Lian opened her eyes. The light on her palms faded. She staggered. Siwoo caught her by the shoulder. She was pale and trembling. Using her power had exhausted her. But she was looking at the boy. And the boy opened his eyes, brown, clear, without the murky haze of fever. He looked at Lian and asked who she was. The door behind them swung open. The innkeeper stood in the doorway. She saw her son with his eyes open, his complexion normal, sitting up in bed. She covered her mouth with her hand and leaned against the door frame. Then she sank to her knees, right there in the doorway. She didn't say thank you. She couldn't speak. She just knelt there and looked at her son. The boy looked at his mother and smiled. He said he was hungry. The innkeeper laughed, for the first time in 3 months, a wet, broken laugh. She got up and ran downstairs to the kitchen. Siwoo led Lian out into the hallway. She could barely stand. He sat her down on a chair and told her she'd done well. Lian lifted her head. She said she'd felt it. While she was treating him, she'd felt the boy's illness.
Not as an abstraction, as a physical sensation. The cold in his bones, the heaviness in his lungs, and she felt something else. Lost time. The 6 months the illness had eaten away at him. She found that time, like crumpled paper in the corner of a room, and smoothed it out again. Siwoo watched her in silence. He thought of the phrase, regenerative resonance, about how this talent didn't just heal, it restored. It restored the body to the state it should have been in without the interference of illness or injury. Lian didn't just bring down the fever, she gave the boy back the 6 months of growth that had been stolen from him. By morning, the news had spread throughout Vern. The innkeeper's son was up. He's walking, eating. He grew 2 centimeters overnight. He looks healthier than before he got sick. People began coming to the tavern, first one by one, then in groups. An old man with a bad back, a woman with a wound on her arm that wouldn't heal, a child with a club foot from birth. They didn't ask. They stood at the entrance and waited. Siwoo watched them from the 2nd-floor window. He was calculating. Lian had been exhausted yesterday after a single healing.
Her mana was at 5, spirit at 8. That would be enough for 2, maybe 3 serious healings a day. If she treated minor ailments, the consumption would be lower. But she needs rest between sessions. She needs food. She needs a plan. He went downstairs. The innkeeper set a bowl of porridge and a mug of milk in front of him. She said they could stay as long as they wanted, for free, anything from the kitchen, the best room. She gave her name, Dora. Siwoo thanked her and asked how many seriously ill people were in town. Dora thought for a moment. She said there were 12 seriously ill people. Chronic wounds from attacks by creatures of the abyss. Old fractures that had healed crookedly. Fevers that come every autumn from the swamps. Siwoo nodded. He went up to Lian. She was already awake and sitting on the bed. She looked better than yesterday. The rest had helped. He sat down across from her and said he had a plan. They would stay in Verna for a few days. Lian would heal, 2 or 3 people a day, no more. Rest and food between sessions. He would monitor her vitals and prevent overexertion. Lian listened. Then she asked why. Why help these people? They're strangers. The council has written them off. The world has written them off. Why waste energy on a village that can give them nothing? Siwoo thought for a second. Then he said that every mage in every game he'd balanced had an early leveling up phase, when the character is weak and needs to gain experience through small quests. This isn't charity, it's grinding. Lian didn't understand the word grinding, but she understood the tone. He wasn't lying, but he wasn't telling the whole truth either. The truth was that Siwoo wanted to see the limits of her ability. He wanted to understand how regenerative resonance worked on different types of injuries and illnesses. He wanted to collect data, like an engineer, like a balancer. But there was another truth, one he didn't voice aloud. When Lian was healing the boy, Siwoo sensed her emotions, not his own, hers. Warmth, peace, quiet happiness that it had worked out. It was a side effect of his ability. Every change in parameters left an imprint in his mind of the feelings of the person he was changing, and from Lian, he received this soft, golden warmth and fear, her fear of being a burden, of being unnecessary, of being cast aside. That fear now lived within him like a quiet hum at the edge of his consciousness. Lian agreed. For the next 4 days, she healed the residents of Vern. An old man with a bad back stood up straight for the first time in 10 years and wept in the square. A woman with a non-healing wound removed her bandage and discovered clean skin without a scar. A child with a crooked leg stood up straight and took his first step without limping. His mother screamed so loud the whole town could hear her. Siwoo watched and took notes, not on paper, in his head. The regenerative resonance worked all the more powerfully the longer the injury had existed. An old wound responded better than a fresh one, as if Lian's talent was finding the body's original blueprint and reconstructing it from that. Mana consumption depended not on severity, but on depth. A superficial wound? Cheap. A crooked bone? More expensive. A 3-month fever with stunted growth? Very expensive. Over these 4 days, Lian had healed 10 people. After each session, she needed an hour of rest. After the 3rd session of the day, she turned pale and her hands shook. Siwoo wouldn't let her do a 4th. On the 5th day, a merchant caravan arrived in Vern, 3 wagons with goods from a neighboring province. The caravan leader walked into the tavern and asked Dora if it was true that there was an elven healer in town. Dora said it was true. The caravan leader said that his partner had broken his arm a week ago and the bone had healed crooked. He would pay in silver. Siwoo went out to meet him. He looked at the caravan driver's stats. Average. Nothing interesting. He looked at the partner with the crooked arm. Average too. But the broken bone was visible in the interface as a red mark on the body diagram. He led the partner to Lian. She placed her hands on his forearm. Golden light. A crack. A quiet groan. A minute later, the man was wiggling his fingers and rotating his wrist. His arm was straight, as if there had been no fracture. The caravan driver paid 2 silver coins and left. But Siwoo knew there was something more important than silver. The caravan driver would tell everyone he met about the green healer from Verna. At every stop, in every tavern, rumors are a currency that grows in value over time. By the end of their first week in Verna, they had silver from grateful patients, a roof over their heads, yes, and Lian's growing reputation. Siwoo sat by the window that evening and looked up at the sky. The stars were foreign, not a single familiar constellation. He thought about their next route. To the south, according to the map they'd been given at the palace, lay an abandoned border region. The villages had been deserted when the abyss drew closer 20 years ago. The people had been evacuated. The houses remained. Among them, a point marked on the map bore the name Solheim, a former fort, a former village, now no man's land. Far enough from the capital for the council to have forgotten them. Close enough to the southern provinces for trade routes to be nearby. He didn't know what awaited them there, but he knew they couldn't stay in Verna. Rumors about the healer would reach not only the caravan drivers, they would reach more serious people. And then the questions would begin. Where did a novice without rank get such power? Who is her companion? What can he do? Questions that Siwoo couldn't afford to answer. On the 8th day, he told Lian it was time to leave. She didn't ask why. She just nodded and began packing their things. Dora saw them off at the tavern's exit. She gave them a bag of food for the week, a warm cloak for Lian, old but sturdy boots for Siwoo. She said the town would remember the green healer, that her son asked every evening when the kind elf would return. Lian smiled, for the first time in all the time Siwoo had known her. The journey south took 6 days. The first 3 passed peacefully. Fields gave way to sparse woods. The sparse woods gave way into a dense pine forest. The air grew colder, heavier. Siwoo felt it not just on his skin. He saw it in the stats of the animals they encountered along the way. A squirrel with agility 4, normal. A deer with strength 3 and endurance 5, also normal. And then the forest grew quieter. The birds fell silent, and Siwoo saw a wolf.
An ordinary gray wolf, but its stats were wrong. Strength 9, endurance 7, spirit 0. 0 spirit in a living creature. That meant the wolf had no consciousness, no instincts beyond the basic ones. No fear, no caution, only hunger and aggression. The corruption of the abyss. Siwoo had heard about this from the guards in the capital.
The abyss warps beasts. It boosts their stats but reduces their spirit to 0. Turns them into killing machines with no self-preservation. The wolf stood 30 paces away, stared at them. It didn't growl, it didn't snarl, it just stared with empty eyes. It waited. Siwoo slowly backed away. His strength was 2, his endurance was 2. One bite from this wolf and he'd be dead. Leanne stood behind him. Her strength was 1. She wouldn't even be able to push the beast away. The wolf moved, not quickly, confidently. It knew its prey wouldn't get away. Siwoo thought frantically. He had no weapons, no magic, no chance in a direct fight. But he had the stats. He looked at the wolf's stats again. Strength 9, endurance 7, agility 6, luck 0. 0 luck, 0. In any game, a character with 0 luck fails every critical roll. Every risky action ends with the worst possible outcome. The wolf couldn't miss a simple attack, but if he created a situation where the result depended on chance. Siwoo grabbed Leanne by the arm and ran. Not along the road, off to the side, through the undergrowth, between the trees. The wolf lunged after them, faster, his agility 6 against Siwoo's agility 1. The distance was shrinking with every second. Siwoo counted his steps in the trees. He was looking for a specific thing. He found it 15 seconds later. An old pine tree with eroded roots hung over the slope. Beneath it was a gully, not deep, but with a sharp rock at the bottom and an icy edge. A trap that only works if the beast steps exactly on the edge. Probability of hitting, low. For a creature with normal luck, a chance to miss. For a creature with 0 luck. Siwoo dashed past the gully on the right. Leanne followed him. The wolf leaped. Its front paw landed precisely on the icy edge. The edge cracked. The wolf fell into the gully. There was a crunch, a howl. A sharp rock pierced the wolf's side. Not fatal, but enough to get stuck. The beast whimpered and thrashed. Its front paws scraped against the frozen ground, but it couldn't free itself. The rock held it like a hook. Siwoo stopped. He was breathing heavily. Leanne stood beside him, white as a sheet. He said they needed to keep going until the wolf had freed itself. Quickly. They walked until dark. Leanne didn't let go of his hand. Siwoo didn't object. His own heart was pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. Strength 2, endurance 2. He had just defeated an opponent with strength 9 by exploiting a flaw in his stats. 0 luck. A glitch in the system. That was exactly how he'd been solving problems for 3 years. Not with strength, with data. On the 4th day of their journey, they came to a river. Wide, cold. There was a bridge, or rather, there had once been one. The remains of stone piers jutted out of the water like rotten teeth. There was no crossing. Siwoo looked upstream and downstream. The river stretched endlessly in both directions. They could walk along the bank for days and not find a crossing. Or, he looked at Leanne's stats. Mana 5, Spirit 8, Hidden Talent active. Something else flickered beneath the main lines. A new line. One that hadn't been there a week ago. Hidden Affinity. Water. Siwoo read that line 3 times. An affinity with water. In a healer. It made sense when you thought about it. Water is the foundation of life. The body is 70% water. A healer with a talent for regeneration and an affinity for water. That's no coincidence. It's synergy. He asked Leanne if she had ever felt a connection to water. Leanne looked at the river. She said that at the monastery, she liked to sit by the stream behind the wall, that the water soothed her. That once, when she was washing her hands in the well, the water rose to meet her, a few centimeters. The abbess saw it and slapped her hands. She said it was heresy, that healers do not control the elements, that it was a deviation from the norm. Siwoo listened and quietly seethed, not on the outside, on the inside. The Mother Superior saw a hidden talent in the child and struck her on the hands. Instead of nurturing it, she suppressed it, blocked it with fear. He asked Leanne to come to the water. She came.
She stood on the bank. The water flowed past, gray, cold. He told her to reach her hands out toward the river, not to do anything, just reach out. Leanne reached out. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then the surface of the river in front of her rippled. The ripples weren't caused by the wind, by her palms. The water rose, slowly, heavily, as if the river had sighed. A column of water, as thick as an arm, rose half a meter and froze. Leanne flinched. The column collapsed back down. She stepped back from the bank. Her eyes were wide. Her hands were trembling.
Siwoo said that this was her ability, that she had always had it, that the abyss was wrong. Leanne stood and looked at her hands, the same hands that had been beaten for causing the water to rise, the same hands with which she had healed the boy in Verna. She asked if he could help her control the water better. Siwoo looked at her stats. Her affinity with water was blocked, gray, inactive, like the number of a guard in the palace corridor, but not quite. The guard's block was complete. Here, it was partial, as if someone had placed a heavy stone on the door. The door wasn't locked, just blocked. He reached for the block mentally and realized he couldn't just remove it. It required the same thing as the evolution slot, trust, but deeper. He asked Leanne if she remembered how she felt when the abyss struck her hands. Leanne turned pale. She said she remembered. Shame. She felt shame, as if she had done something dirty, something wrong, something she needed to ask forgiveness for. Siwoo nodded. He said that this shame was the lock, not a magical one, an emotional one. The Mother Superior had convinced her that her ability was a deviation, and Leanne believed it, and her own soul had blocked the kinship. To remove the block, Leanne must believe that it is not heresy, not an aberration, not a mistake, but a part of who she is. Leanne was silent for a long time. The river roared, the wind chased the clouds. Finally, she said quietly that she didn't know how to believe it, that for 20 years she had been told that she had to be a certain way. Quiet, obedient, useful, not to stand out, not to be different. And when she was different, she was punished. Siwoo replied that he understood, that for 3 years he too had been told that his job was just numbers, that he had to silently manage the spreadsheets and not ask questions. And he remained silent until the very last day. And on the last day, he wrote a single line in the code comments. Players are real people. Don't turn them into numbers. And the next morning, he was here. Leanne looked at him. Something in her eyes had changed. Not much, just as if a door inside her had opened a crack. Siwoo saw it in the parameters. The block on her affinity with water had faded. It hadn't disappeared, but it had grown thinner. He said he wouldn't rush her, that the lock would open when she was ready. In the meantime, they needed to cross the river, another way. They walked 2 hours downstream and found a spot where the river narrowed. A fallen tree lay across it, wet, slippery, but thick enough to cross. They crossed, slowly, carefully. Leanne almost fell in the middle. Siwoo caught her by the hand. His strength, too, was barely enough to keep her from slipping. On the other bank, they sat down on the ground and just breathed for a minute. The 5th day of their journey. The forest thinned out. A hilly plain opened up ahead. The grass was yellow and dry. Here and there, the remains of fences stuck out. Former fields, former pastures. Land that people had abandoned 20 years ago when the abyss drew closer. On the 6th day, they saw Solheim. From the top of the hill, it looked like a handful of gray stones scattered across the valley. Remains of walls, a tower with a collapsed roof, houses without doors, paths overgrown with weeds, no smoke, no movement, empty, dead. Siwoo spent his first day in Solheim scouting. He walked around every building, every wall, every basement. The fort was larger than it appeared from the hill. 26 houses. A central square with a well, a tower 4 stories high, a smithy with a collapsed roof but an intact wall, a granary with a collapsed eastern wall, a barracks with 24 bunks, and a wall. A stone wall around the perimeter, 2.5 meters high, crumbling in places but mostly intact.
Someone had built this fort with care. The well worked. Siwoo lowered a stone on a rope and heard a splash 4 seconds later. The water was clear and cold. One problem solved. 3 of the 26 houses were in a condition suitable for living in. The roofs were intact. The walls were standing. The doors could be closed. The rest required repairs ranging from minor to major. Siwoo chose the house closest to the well. 2 stories, 4 rooms, a fireplace with an intact chimney. They moved in. Lian started cleaning. Siwoo took stock of the supplies. In the smithy, he found rusty tools, a hammer, pliers, a set of chisels. In the barracks, he found 24 rotten mattresses and 1 intact one. In the basement of one of the houses, he found a supply of dried herbs. Someone hadn't had time to take them during the evacuation 20 years ago.
The herbs were old, but some were still usable. Lian sorted through them and set aside 5 bundles that might be useful for medicinal poultices. By the evening of the first day, they had a place to live. Water, a meager supply of tools, food from Vern to last 4 days. After that, they would have to find their own food. Siwoo sat by the fireplace and thought. His plan was simple in theory. Solheim would become their base. They would operate from here. Lian would heal. Rumors would spread. People would come on their own. First the sick, then the merchants, then those looking for a place to live. The fort would become a village. The new would become a small town. In theory. In practice, 2 people with a combined strength of 3 couldn't physically rebuild the fort. They needed people. And the first person arrived on the 3rd day. Siwoo heard a knock at the gate, or rather, at the spot where the gate had once been. An old man stood there. He was over 70. His back was bent. His right arm hung limply. His face was weathered and darkened by the sun. His stats surprised Siwoo. Strength 7, Endurance 8, Agility 3, Spirit 2, Mana 0, Luck 1. High physical stats for an old man. Once upon a time, this man had been strong, very strong. Strength 7 meant a professional fighter or a heavy laborer. But his right hand. Siwoo looked more closely. A red mark on the interface. Nerve damage. Chronic. Over 20 years. The arm hadn't worked for more than 2 decades. The old man said he'd heard about the green healer. From a caravan driver. Who had heard it from another caravan driver. Who had been in Verna. The old man had walked for 3 days. With one hand. At his age. Siwoo led him inside. Lian came out of the house. She looked at the old man. At his hand. Her palms glowed even before she approached. A golden light. Faint. Lecture. Her body reacted to another's pain before she made a decision. The old man introduced himself. Horn. A former mason. He had built this fort 40 years ago. He lost his arm in a battle with a creature of the abyss 22 years ago. Since then, he had been unable to work in his trade. He lived in a village 30 kilometers to the east. He helped out as best he could with one hand. Siwoo listened and calculated. A mason, with strength 7 and endurance 8, who built this very fort. If Lian restores his hand, Horn will be able to work, and he knows every stone in these walls. This is no coincidence. This is the first recruit. Lian sat the old man down on a bench by the well. She placed her hands on his right shoulder. She closed her. A golden light poured down over his dead hand, slowly, like a river filling a dry riverbed. Horn groaned, not from pain, from a sensation he hadn't felt in 22 years. A tingling in his fingers, warmth in his palm. Life was returning to his dead nerves. The process took 10 minutes, longer than any healing in Verna. 22 years of damage. Lian turned pale. Sweat beaded on her forehead. But she didn't stop. When the light went out, Horn sat and looked at his right hand. He clenched his fist. Slowly, finger by finger, a fist formed. Strong. Full. For the first time in 22 years. The old man raised his hand. He wiggled his fingers, bent his elbow, straightened it. Every movement precise, smooth, as if the hand had never been damaged. Horn began to cry.
silently, without a sound. Tears streamed down his wrinkled face as he clenched and unclenched his fist again and again. Siwoo sensed a wave of emotions from Lian. Exhaustion, pride, a quiet warmth, and something new. A feeling he had never felt from her before. Confidence. Small, fragile, but real. She had done what no healer had been able to do in 22 years, and she knew it. Horn stood up. He wiped his face. He looked at Siwoo, then at the fort's walls, then at his hands, both of them. He said he wouldn't leave, that if the green healer lived here, he needed a roof and stones. He would build what was needed. Siwoo nodded. He knew this was exactly what would happen, not because he had planned it, but because it was a natural mechanism. You give a person what was taken from them. The person gives you what they know how to do, not out of obligation, out of gratitude. Because for the first time in a long while, they feel needed. Horn started working that very day, with one hand. No, with two. He lifted stones that weighed as much as Siwoo himself. He stacked them with a craftsman's precision. The wall on the eastern section grew by a meter in a single day. On the 5th day after their arrival, 3 more people came to the fort. A woman with 2 children, from the same village as Horn. He had sent word. The woman's name was Era. Average stats: strength 3, endurance 4, spirit 3, nothing remarkable. But her hidden stat made Siwoo pause. Hidden talent: farming on depleted soil. Interesting. She had an innate talent for growing plants on land others considered dead. The children were healthy. Their stats were low but stable. The boy is 10. The girl is 7. Era said she didn't come for treatment. She came for a place to live. The village had become too crowded. There wasn't enough land. There was no work. Horn wrote that there was a healer in the old fort and a place for those willing to work. She was ready. Siwoo showed her a barn with a collapsed wall. He said the land around the fort was free, that if she could, the food would be shared. Era looked at the ground. She crouched down. She scooped up a handful. She rubbed it between her fingers. She said the soil was poor, but not dead. 20 years without cultivation wasn't the end. The roots of the old grasses had preserved the structure. If they cleared the field and prepared the beds properly, the first harvest would come in 2 months. Siwoo nodded. 2 workdays in Solheim, and they already had 2 specialists, a mason and a farmer. On the 7th day, a 4th arrived, a young man, about 20 years old. He limped on his left leg. His name was Theo. Stats: strength 5, endurance 3, agility 1, spirit 4, mana 3, luck 6. Siwoo lingered on the luck stat. 6. That was a very high score. In his experience as a balancer, high luck compensated for almost any shortcoming. A character with luck 6 found rare items more often, dodged critical hits, ended up in the right place at the right time. But Theo limped. His left knee was injured. A red mark on the interface, an old injury, about 5 years ago. He came for treatment. He'd heard about the healer from a merchant on the road. He'd walked for 2 days. He said he was ready to pay. He pulled a handful of copper coins from his pocket, all he had. Siwoo looked at the coins. He looked at Theo. Then he said the treatment was free. But if Theo wanted to repay him, they needed an extra pair of hands at the fort. Theo agreed without hesitation. Lian healed his knee in 3 minutes. A simple injury, chronic but not deep. Golden light, a crack. Theo straightened his leg. He walked around. He stopped, walked again, faster. Then he ran. Around the fort's courtyard. He just ran. Because he could. He hadn't been able to run for 5 years, and now he was running. He stopped and turned to Lian, his face conveying so much that words would have been superfluous. 3 weeks had passed since their arrival in Solheim. The population had grown to 8 people, counting Siwoo and Lian. Horn was repairing the walls and houses. Ira was clearing the field west of the fort. Theo turned out to be a jack of all trades. He repaired roofs. He chopped wood. He carried stones for Horn. His high luck worked exactly as Siwoo had expected. He found intact planks in the ruins where others saw only rubble. He stumbled upon iron staples sticking out of the ground just when they were needed for repairs. Once, he climbed onto the roof, and a collapsed beam fell right between him and the wall without hitting either of them. Siwoo watched this and shook his head quietly. Luck 6. the most underrated stat in any system. People and gods looked at strength and endurance, but the real value lay in the numbers that no one noticed. On the evening of the 21st day, Siwoo sat on the tower, the only place in the fort from which all of Solheim and the surrounding area could be seen. The moon hung over the plain, clear, bright. He thought about his immediate plans. There was still food. Supplies from Verna were almost gone, but Era had promised that the first sprouts would appear in a week. Horn had restored 4 houses. Theo had repaired the smithy's roof. In a month, the fort would be ready to take in another 10 to 15 people. The horseman returned a week later. This time, he wasn't alone. There were 3 of them. Siwoo saw them from the tower. 3 white cloaks on the hill. They stood and looked at Solheim for half an hour. Then they turned and rode away. Horn stood next to Siwoo on the tower, frowning. He said he recognized the symbol. Golden scales on a white field. The order of pure measure. Temple fanatics who enforce the law of parameters. They believe that the numbers sewn into a person by the goddess Velesta at birth are sacred. To change them is a sin. Helping those below their place in the hierarchy is also a sin, because if a person has a fortitude of 2, that is the will of the goddess, and to heal them beyond a certain limit means to go against that will. Siwoo listened and felt a cold anger rising within him. Not hot, not furious, cold and precise as a line of code. He asked Horn how dangerous the order was. Horn said very. They have warrior priests, above-average stats, strength 10 or higher among the rank and file. Commanders are even stronger. Grand Inquisitor Kalev Orn is one of the strongest people on the continent. They don't kill right away. First they warn you, then they come back, then they take you away. No one ever sees those they take away again. Siwoo nodded. They had time. Not much, but they had it. The order had been merely observing so far, reconnaissance. They wanted to understand exactly what was happening in Solheim. Rumors of the Green Healer had reached them, but rumors aren't proof. Until they saw with their own eyes that Lian was doing something beyond ordinary healing, they wouldn't attack. That gave them a window. Siwoo estimated a month, maybe 2. After that, the order would either send an inspection or a punitive expedition. By then, the fort had to be ready. Not for war, for defense. He climbed down from the tower and gathered everyone in the square. Horn, Era, Theo, Lian, 3 more newcomers. A hunter named Wald, who'd arrived 2 days ago with a dislocated shoulder and stayed. An elderly herbalist named Kel, who was passing through on her way south, stopped to spend the night and ended up staying. And a teenager named Rin, 14 years old, an orphan. He came alone. He said he'd heard that in the old fort they feed you and don't beat you. That was enough for him. Siwoo looked at them. 10 people, including himself and Lian. 10 people against an order with thousands of warriors across the continent. The odds were bad. But Siwoo had worked with bad odds his whole life. He said briefly. The men in white cloaks had come 3 times. Soon they would come for real, not to scout, with questions, with accusations, possibly with weapons. The fort must be ready, not for battle, to ensure there was nothing to accuse them of. Horn asked how that was possible if Lien healed people in a way that clearly went beyond the ordinary. If the Order sees the golden light and the results of the healing, they'll call it heresy. Siwoo replied that the Order can call whatever they want, but they have rules, procedures. They serve the law of parameters, and that law is written in the temple codices. Siwoo asked if anyone had a copy of the codex. Silence. Then Kel raised her hand. She said she had an old copy, in her travel bag. She kept it for reference on herbs because some plants are classified as prohibited under the codex. Siwoo asked for it. Kel brought a worn book in a leather binding. Thick, heavy, small print, over 300 pages. Siwoo opened the first page and began to read. He read for 3 days, from morning until night. Lian brought him food and water. He ate without taking his eyes off the pages. The Code of Parameters was the document upon which the entire legal order of the continent was based, written 300 years ago, updated twice. The last time was 140 years ago. Siwoo read it the way he read game balance documents. Not the content, but the structure. Not the letter, but the logic. And by the third day, he had 12 pages of mental notes. The code was full of holes, like any document written 300 years ago and updated twice.
The rules contradicted each other. The definitions were vague. Precedents were not taken into account. It was not a law. It was a first draft that no one had balanced. For example, Clause 14 stated that altering the parameters was heresy. But the definition of alteration was never clearly spelled out anywhere. Training increased strength by fractions of a unit. That was an alteration, but training was not considered heresy. Potions temporarily increased endurance. That's also a change. That's also not heresy. Where is the line? The code didn't say. Paragraph 47 stated that a healer cannot restore the body beyond its natural limits. But the natural limit is not defined anywhere. If a boy was ill for 3 months and lost half a year's growth, does restoring that growth exceed the limit? Or is it a restoration to the state he would have been in had he not been ill? The code was silent. Article 112 stated that a companion of a summoned hero is subject to the laws of the state in whose territory they are located. But Solheim did not belong to any state. It had been abandoned. Officially, a no-man's land. If a no-man's land has no laws, then the code does not apply there.
Or perhaps it does. It depends on interpretation. Siwoo closed the book on the third day and smiled. It was the first time in a month he had truly smiled. Gorn asked what had cheered him up. Siwoo said that their main opponent was playing by the rules, and the rules were poorly written. It was the best news he'd heard since his conscription. He began preparing a defense. Not walls, not weapons, arguments. He spent 2 days discussing with Gorn and Kel every clause of the code that could be used against them, and every clause that could be used in their defense. By the end of the 5th week in Solheim, Siwoo had a plan. The order would come. They always come. But they would come with charges. And the charges were based on the code, and the code was full of holes, like a sieve. Meanwhile, life at the fort went on. Leanne healed, more cautiously than in Verna. Siwoo limited the number of patients to 2 a day, not out of greed, for safety. Every healing is a witness. Every witness is a potential informant. They had to control the flow. Theo, with his luck 6, became an unofficial scout. Every day he went outside the walls and roamed the surroundings. He wasn't looking for anything in particular. He just walked and found things. On the first day, he found an abandoned warehouse with 30 sacks of grain. Old, but usable. Era checked it. 5 sacks were hopeless. 25 were good for planting. On the third day, Theo found a spring a mile to the north. Clean water. Better than a well. We could dig a canal to the field. On the 5th day, I found a cave in a hill where we could store food in the cool, even in summer. Luck 6. Every day, a small miracle. Unnoticeable, ordinary. But life was made up of such miracles. Siwoo recorded every find. He built a map of resources in his head. Grain, water, stone, wood, working hands, medicine. Every element in its place, like variables in a balance equation. By the end of the 5th week, 5 more people had arrived. A family of 4 and a single man. Everyone had heard of the Green Healer. They all came for help and stayed to work. Solheim's population had reached 15. Not many, but enough to get started. Era planted the first garden beds. Sprouts appeared a week later, faster than in normal soil. Her hidden talent was at work. The depleted soil yielded a harvest, not a bountiful one, but a steady one. Leanne had grown stronger. Her spirit 8 allowed for 3 full healings a day without losing consciousness, 4 if they were minor. Siwoo saw her confidence grow. Not quickly, millimeter by millimeter. Every patient she healed added a tiny speck of self-belief to her. And every evening by the fireplace, she would sit next to Siwoo and silently watch the fire. She didn't say anything. She was just there. Siwoo could sense her emotions. Peace, warmth, quiet gratitude, and still fear. Fainter than before, but still there. Fear that it would all end. That one morning she would wake up and find herself back in the monastery, alone. On the 36th day, a man in a white cloak entered the gates of Solheim. Alone, unarmed, with golden scales on his chest. His stats were high: strength 11, endurance 9, spirit 7, mana 6, dexterity 5, luck 3. A battle priest, mid-rank, not a commander, an inspector. He stopped in the square and looked around. He looked at the walls that Horn had repaired, at Ira's garden beds, at the well, at the people who had frozen and were staring at him. Then he looked at Siwoo, who was standing at the entrance to the house, and at Lian, who stood behind him. The inspector identified himself. Brother Talon, Order of Pure Measure. He had arrived to inspect the activities of a healer operating in a territory free from the jurisdiction of any empire. A formal tone, official words. He wasn't threatening, he was asking questions. By procedure. Just as Siwoo had expected. Siwoo stepped forward. He replied that he was pleased with Brother Talon's visit, that Solheim was open to inspection, that the healer, Lian Everfall, operated within the bounds of her innate gift and did not violate a single clause of the Code of Parameters. Talon raised an eyebrow. He hadn't expected a vagabond vocation to quote the code. He asked on what grounds Siwoo was making such a statement. Siwoo replied calmly. He cited Article 47 of the Code. A healer cannot restore a body beyond its natural limits. All Lian is doing is returning the body to its natural state. Illness and injury deviate the body from the norm. Healing returns it to the norm. This is not a change in parameters, it is restoration. Talon frowned. He said he had received reports of a boy who had grown 2 centimeters overnight. That goes beyond restoration. Siwoo replied that the boy had lost 6 months of growth due to illness. 2 centimeters is not above normal growth. It is the return of what was stolen. Talon was silent. He could not argue. Not because Siwoo was right, but because the code did not define the boundary between restoration and alteration. Siwoo knew this loophole. Talon knew it too. But Talon couldn't admit it out loud. He said he would report the results of the inspection, that the order would make a decision, that until the next visit, the healer's activities should be restricted. He turned and left, without saying goodbye. Horn stood next to Siwoo and watched the white cloak disappear. He said it was bad, that the order wouldn't back down, that the next visit wouldn't be an inspection. Siwoo nodded. He knew. But today they'd bought some time. A week, maybe 2. Until Talon reached the nearest chapter, until he reported, until the commanders discussed it, until they made a decision. Every day brought a new resident, new walls, new resources. Time was the only currency they had, and Siwoo was going to spend every second of it. In the evening, he climbed the tower. Lian came after him. She stood beside him and looked out at the plain. Dark, silent. Somewhere out there beyond the horizon, 100 kilometers to the south, lay the Abyss Rift, a fault line from which corruption had seeped for 300 years. Between it and Solheim there was nothing. No villages, no forts, no walls, only empty land. Lian said she was scared. Siwoo said he was too. She looked at him in surprise. He shouldn't have said that. A leader shouldn't say he's scared. But Siwoo wasn't a leader. He was a balancer. And honesty was the only resource that never ran out. He said he was afraid, that he didn't know if it would work out, that every day he woke up thinking that any one of the 15 people below could die because of his decisions. Talon returned 12 days later, not alone. Behind him stood 8 warrior priests in white robes, and a woman, tall, thin, with a face carved from stone. Her stats made Siwoo go cold. Strength 14. Endurance 12, Spirit 11, Mana 9, Agility 8, Luck 5. She wasn't an inspector, she was a commander, the Order's chief investigator. Her name was Verena Sol. Siwoo saw something else in her interface. Hidden status. Velus's blessing, second circle. This meant she could harness the goddess's power directly. Suppress enemy magic, block abilities, bind a body by command. 10 people with a combined combat power that could raise Solheim to the ground in 10 minutes. Siwoo stood in the square and weighed his options. Escape was impossible. 15 residents, including 2 children. A fight was impossible.
His power was 2. The strongest fighter in the fort was Horn, with power 7 and a healed arm. Against 14, led by the weakest of the priests, there was only one option left: negotiation. Verena Sol stopped 5 steps away from Siwoo. She did not introduce herself. She said that Brother Talon had reported the results of the inspection, that his report had raised questions, that she had arrived for an extended inspection under Article 7 of the Order's Charter, and that all healing activities in Solheim would be suspended for the duration of the inspection. Siwoo nodded. He asked what the procedure for an extended inspection was. Verena looked at him with mild surprise. Talon, standing nearby, grimaced almost imperceptibly. This guy was asking about the procedure again. Verena replied in an even voice. An extended investigation includes an inspection of the site of activity, an interrogation of the healer, an interrogation of all witnesses to the healings, a verification of the healer's parameters using official methods, the drafting of a report, the submission of the report to the chapter for a decision. The review takes 3 to 7 days. Siwoo listened and thought. Interrogating Lian is a problem. She doesn't know how to lie. She'll start to get nervous. They'll ask direct questions about the nature of her ability. If she says that Siwoo redistributed her parameters, it'll all be over. The parameter check is also a problem. The official method involved using the artifact known as Velesta's scales, small golden scales that read a person's current parameters and compared them to the record at birth. If the numbers didn't match, it was an automatic charge of heresy. Lian was born with a spirit of 6. Now she has a spirit of 8, a difference of 2 points. That's a death sentence. Siwoo needed a plan, right now. He asked for an hour to prepare for the inspection. Verena agreed. An hour is the standard time allotted to get things in order before an inspection. Siwoo went into the house. Lian followed him. Her hands were shaking. She had seen the priests. She saw their parameters. She understood what that meant. Siwoo closed the door. He sat down on a chair. He closed his eyes. He thought. The scales of Velesta compare current parameters with the birth record, but the birth record is a static mark. It is stored in the soul like a fingerprint, unchanging, and current parameters change. Training adds fractions of a unit. Illness takes away. Age has an effect. The scales show the difference, and if the difference exceeds the permissible margin of error, it is heresy. Permissible margin of error. Siwoo opened his eyes. He remembered this term from the Codex, Clause 23. Natural fluctuations in parameters within 0.5 units are not grounds for accusation. But with Lian, the difference isn't 0.5. Hers is 2. -2 in strength and +2 in spirit. It's obvious. The scales will show. He thought further. The scales read the parameters through magical resonance. They were tuned to a specific frequency, like a radio receiver. If he could knock the frequency off, no. He couldn't change his own parameters. He couldn't interfere with the artifact's operation. His ability only worked with living people who trusted him. He looked at Lian. She was sitting on the edge of the bed looking at him, waiting, believing he would come up with something. That trust burned. He opened her interface, looked at the numbers: Strength 1, Endurance 4, Spirit 8, Agility 2, Luck 1, Mana 5. And he saw something he hadn't noticed before. Below the main stats, next to each number, there was a second line, faint, almost invisible. Base value. For Spirit, the base value was 6, current 8, difference 2. For Strength, the base was 3, current 1, difference -2. The scales read precisely this difference, base and current, and if the difference was greater than 0.5, then a charge. But the base value was also a line in the interface, faint, almost inactive, but a line. C mentally reached out to it. The line responded, weakly, barely, as if it were protected, but not completely locked, not like other parameters, more like a read-only file, which, under certain conditions, could be switched to edit mode. What conditions? Siwoo concentrated. The line flickered. He felt resistance, not from Lian, from something else, from the system itself, as if the goddess Velesta herself had personally placed a protection on the birth record. He couldn't hack it. He couldn't change the default value, but he could do something else. He could temporarily revert the current settings to the defaults,
a rollback, patch notes. He could save Leanne's current build and roll her back to factory settings for a while, then bring her back. He had one rollback per week. He'd never used it. Now was the time. He explained it to Leanne, quickly, briefly. He'd return her parameters to the state she was born with, temporarily, for a few hours, until the scales took their reading. Then he would return everything to the way it was. She would lose her golden light for a while. Regenerative resonance would be deactivated. Her affinity with water would be blocked again. She would become the Leanne who had knelt in the recruitment hall, weak, frightened, with spirit 6 and strength 3, for a few hours. Leanne turned pale. She asked what if something went wrong? What if the parameters didn't return? What if the rollback became permanent? Siwoo paused. He couldn't guarantee it. He was using this function for the first time, but he believed it would work, because his entire ability operated on a single principle: trust. He told her this straight out, that he couldn't promise a 100% result, but that he would do everything in his power, and that if she didn't want to take the risk, they could try another way. Escape, right now, through the back wall, abandon Solheim and everyone in it. Leon looked out the window. In the square, Horn stood with his arms crossed over his chest, facing the priests. The old stonemason who 3 weeks ago couldn't lift a stone, and now was blocking the gate with his body. Era held the children close. Theo stood slightly to the side with a wooden shovel in his hand, as if it could help against the warrior priests. Leanne turned to Siwoo. She said she wouldn't leave, that these people had come here because of her, and that she wouldn't be the one to abandon them. Rewind. Siwoo nodded. He activated the function. For the first time, the sensation was strange, as if he'd pressed the undo button in a program, and the entire last month of edits had begun unwind. Leanne flinched. She closed her eyes. Her body tensed for a second. Then it relaxed. When she opened her eyes, the golden glow on her fingers was gone. Siwoo checked the stats. Strength 3, Stamina 4, Spirit 6, Agility 2, Luck 1, Mana 5. Base stats, exactly the same. Hidden talent, gray, inactive. Affinity with water, invisible. Evolution slot, closed. Leanne looked just like that girl from the first day. Small, quiet, with lifeless eyes. Siwoo felt a twinge in his chest. It hurt, not physically. He saw the light in her go out, how she became a number again, that very number the whole world considered useless. But it was temporary, he reminded himself. Temporary. They stepped out onto the square. Verena was standing in the same spot, motionless, patient. She looked at Leanne, at her stats. Something in her face softened slightly. She saw a frail novice with low stats. Nothing threatening, nothing heretical. She took a pair of golden scales out of her bag, small, the size of a palm, 2 pans, a thin pointer, an artifact of Valesta. She asked Leanne to place her hands on the pans. Leanne stepped forward, placed her palms. The scales glowed with a soft white light. The pointer wavered, swayed to the left, to the right, froze in the center. Exactly, perfectly. The baseline values matched the current ones, 0 deviation. Verena looked at the scales, looked at Leanne, put the artifact away. Her face showed nothing. But Siwoo saw her hidden parameters, and among them flashed a line he hadn't expected to see. Hidden status. Doubt. Verena's soul had doubts. Not about the scales results, about something else, something deeper. The interrogation lasted 4 hours. Verena spoke with each resident individually, with Horn, with Dora, whose son had recovered in Verna. No, Dora had been in Verna, with those who had been here, with Era, with Theo, with Kel, with everyone who had seen Leanne heal. Siwoo couldn't control what they would say, but he didn't need to. Gorn told the truth, that the healer laid her hands on his dead shoulder and he felt warmth, and the arm came back to life. Theo told the truth, that she touched his knee and it stopped hurting. Everyone said the same thing: hands, light, warmth, healing. None of them knew about the redistribution of parameters. None of them saw the interfaces. None of them could say anything other than that Leanne had healed them, and healing was not heresy. Healing was the healer's gift, a lowly gift, a weak one, with Spirit 6 and Mana 5, but a gift nonetheless. Verena conducted Leanne's interrogation last, alone, in the house. Siwoo waited outside. 20 minutes, the longest 20 minutes of his life. When the door opened, Leanne emerged pale but calm. Verena followed her out. She looked at Siwoo, a long look, appraising. She said that the results of the investigation were inconclusive, that the evidence pointed to an unusually high healing efficacy for a healer of her rank, but that no formal violations of the code had been found. The report would be forwarded to the chapter. Until a decision was reached, the healer's practice could continue, with restrictions. No more than 1 patient per day, only within Solheim, no house calls. A month had passed since Verena's visit. Solheim was growing. 28 residents by the end of the 2nd month, 36 by the middle of the 3rd. People came alone and in families. Rumors of the green healer from the abandoned fort had turned into an enduring legend in the southern provinces. It was said that the elf heals for free, that she only takes those whom others have turned away. That after her treatment, people don't just recover, but become stronger than they were before their illness. The last part was true, and that was a problem. Siwoo limited Leon to 1 patient a day, as Verena had prescribed. Leon obeyed, but every evening when they were alone, she said that more people were waiting outside, that they had come from far away, that some of them wouldn't live to see their turn. Siwoo knew this. He saw their stats from the tower, saw the red markers of illness, saw how their stamina dropped with every day of waiting. But he couldn't take the risk. 1 patient a day. The rule. Until the order issued a final decision, any violation would be grounds for punitive action. He looked for another way out, and he found it on the morning of the 63rd day. A woman approached the gates of Solheim, young, 22 years old, dressed in gray rags, barefoot. Her right eye covered with a dirty bandage. Her left eye looked straight at Siwoo. Black. Calm. Absolutely calm. Her stats were unusual. Strength 4, Endurance 5, Spirit 14, Mana 11, Agility 3, Luck 2. Spirit 14. Siwoo read that number 3 times. 14. It was the highest spirit score he had ever seen in a living person. Higher than the old man from the Council of 7. Higher than Verena Sol. Higher than anyone in Solheim, including Leanne. And Mana 11. For a priestess, this meant an almost unlimited magical reserve. With such stats, this woman must have been a high priestess, head of the temple order, advisor to the emperor. But she stood barefoot in rags at the gates of an abandoned fort. Siwoo looked deeper. Hidden parameters opened up like a book. Trauma, betrayal by a mentor, hidden talent, true sight, status, blocked by the Temple of Velesta, true name, Yuna Songwa, brand, heretic, sentence, exile with loss of rank. He read line by line, and the picture came together. Yuna Songwa was a priestess of the Temple of Velesta, of high rank, with a talent the temple deemed dangerous. True sight, the ability to see the true essence of things, not with physical sight, with spiritual sight. She saw lies. She saw hidden intentions. She saw that people's appearances did not match who they truly were, and she began to speak about it aloud. She said that appearances were a cage, not a gift. The temple responded. They burned her cell, gouged out her right eye, declared her a heretic, exiled. But before exiling her, they blocked her true sight with a special ritual, so that she would never again see the truth that no one wanted to see. Yuna stood at the gate and said nothing. She didn't ask for help, didn't ask for healing. She said only one thing, that she'd heard about a man who sees other people's numbers, not about the healer, about him, about Siwoo. She wasn't going to Leon, she was going to him. Siwoo asked how she knew. Yuna smiled slightly, with the left corner of her mouth. She said that when they gouge out one of your eyes, you start to see better with the one that's left. That rumors speak of a miraculous healer, But rumors lie. Healers don't do what Leon Everfall does. Healers don't restore stolen years. Healers don't regrow dead nerves in a hand that hasn't worked for 2 decades. Someone else does that. Someone standing behind her. Someone who knows how the numbers work. She came to find out who he was. Siwoo was silent for 10 seconds. Then he told her to come in. They talked until nightfall. Yuna told her story in an even voice, without self-pity, without anger, just the facts. She grew up in the temple. She showed a talent for the priesthood at 6, spirit 14 at birth, a record for a novice. The temple took her from her family and raised her as a future high priestess. At 15, her true sight opened. She began to see what others did not. That some people's stats did not match their true nature. That a person with a strength of 12 could be a coward. That a peasant woman with a spirit of 2 could possess greater wisdom than an archbishop. That the numbers lie. She told this to her mentor. Her mentor told her to be silent. She disobeyed. She said it again, louder. At the gathering of priestesses, the abbess turned pale. The archbishop arrived in person. She was 17. The interrogation lasted 3 days. On the 4th day, they gouged out her right eye with a red-hot rod. They said that through that eye, the demon of doubt was looking into her. They blocked her true sight with a sealing ritual. They burned her writings. They banished her. She wandered for 5 years, from city to city, from village to village. She lived like a beggar. She worked wherever she could find a job. She left when they noticed the brand on her neck. The eye patch drew attention. The heretic's brand drew fear. 5 years. Siwoo listened and felt the same cold anger boiling inside him as on the day he read the codex. Not hot, calculating. These people took a girl with a record-breaking spirit of 14, with a unique talent for seeing the truth, and they broke her, because the truth she saw threatened their system. He opened her interface completely. He looked at the true sight block. It was different from the water affinity block on Lian. That one was emotional, fear and shame. This one was placed by the temple, a magical seal, gray, dense, heavy, like a concrete wall. He reached for it and realized he couldn't remove it. He had no access. Yuna wasn't his companion. There was no summoning bond between them. Her parameters glowed, but were gray, inactive, just like that guard in the palace corridor. Siwoo sat and thought. The summoning bond gave him access to Lian's parameters, but Yuna wasn't his companion. He needed something else. He remembered how Lian's evolution slot had opened. Not through magic, through truth, through the question of what she really wanted, through trust. Maybe trust was the key. Not the summoning link, but the connection between people. He asked Yuna what she wanted. Yuna looked at him with her one eye for a long time. Then she said she wanted to see. Not with her eye. That eye is dead. She wants to see the truth. Like before, she wants to get back what was taken from her. Not for revenge, to know that she isn't crazy, that what she saw was real, that the numbers really do lie. Siwoo felt something click, not in his head, in the space between them, as if an invisible lock had turned. He looked at her interface. The numbers had changed color, from gray to pale gold. Not bright, not fully active, but no longer locked. Trust. She had told the truth. She believed he could help. Not completely, not all the way, but enough for the door to open a crack. Siwoo reached for the lock. Now he could touch it. The seal was tight, heavy. He couldn't remove it all at once, but he could weaken it, like unscrewing a bolt, one turn at a time. He removed the first layer. Yuna flinched. She closed her one eye, then opened it, and froze. She said she could see. Barely, as if through a fogged-up window, but she could see. Outlines, shadows. Above Siwoo's head, she saw a blurry spot. His features, indistinct, but she saw them. For the first time in 5 years. Yuna Songhua didn't cry. She didn't know how. 5 years had taught her not to cry. But her one eye glistened, and she quietly said she would stay, if she could. Siwoo said the door was open, both ways. Yuna nodded. She chose to stay. That same evening, Siwoo introduced Yuna to Lian. The two women looked at each other. Lian saw the eye patch and the brand on her neck. Yuna saw the golden light on Lian's fingers. Lian held out her hand. Yuna hesitated. Then she took it. Lian asked if she could look at the eye. Yuna removed the patch. Beneath it was an empty eye socket. Red, old, healed. Lian turned pale. Then she placed her palm on the empty eye socket. Golden light. Yuna shuddered. Warmth surged into a place that had been dead for 5 years. Lian withdrew her hand a minute later. The eye socket hadn't changed. The eye hadn't grown back. Regenerative resonance could restore the body to its ideal state, but the eye had been completely destroyed. Not damaged, destroyed. There was no blueprint to restore it from. Lian dropped her hands. Her eyes filled with tears. She said she couldn't do it, that the eye was lost, that she was useless. An old phrase, an old fear. Yuna looked at her and suddenly laughed, a short, dry laugh. She said that Lian had just removed the pain that had tormented her for 5 years, the phantom pain in the dead eye socket, the burning that kept her awake every night. It was gone. For the first time in 5 years, and Lian calls herself useless. Yuna said that if this is uselessness, then she wants to know what usefulness looks like. Lian blinked, looked at Yuna, at her calm face with the empty eye socket and the shadow of a smile, and laughed, quietly, unsurely, but she laughed. Siwoo stood by the door and watched them, two broken women who had just mended each other. Not with parameters, not with magic, with words. He thought that this was true synergy, not the kind you can calculate in a table, the kind you can't. Yuna changed Solheim in the very first week, not with magic, with her mind. She was educated. 15 years in the temple meant more than just prayers and rituals. It meant languages, history, law, medicine, strategy. Yuna knew the laws of all 7 empires. She knew the temple statutes by heart. She knew how the bureaucracy of the Order of Pure Measure worked from the inside. She had spent 5 years on the other side of the system and now saw every seam in it. The first thing she did was ask Siwoo to show her the codex. He gave her the Book of Kel. Yuna read it in a day. In the morning, she came to Siwoo with an expression he had already learned to recognize, a hint of a smile on the left side of her mouth. It meant she had found something interesting. She said his analysis of the codex was good, for an amateur, but he had missed the main point. Article 203, a little-known clause at the end of the code, about free cities. 300 years ago, when the code was written, so-called free settlements existed on the continent. Places where refugees and exiles lived outside the jurisdiction of the empires. The code could not ignore them because the people in them also had parameters. That is why Section 203 was written. A free settlement on no man's land with a population of at least 50 souls had the right to declare itself autonomous. The autonomous settlement was subject to the code, but had the right to its own interpretation of its provisions. Its own interpretation. Siwoo stared at Yuna. She nodded. If Solheim takes 50 residents and declares autonomy, they will gain the legal right to interpret the code as they see fit, including determining what constitutes heresy and what does not, including defining the line between restoration and alteration of parameters. The order could still challenge their interpretation, but that would require a formal trial, a temple tribunal, and a tribunal means months of preparation, witnesses, evidence, a defense. Yuna knew the procedure. She could build a defense that would bog the tribunal down for years. Siwoo looked at Yuna and said she had just paid for her parish in Solheim for the next 10 years. Yuna replied with a stony face that she appreciated his in assessing her worth. It was humor. Siwoo already knew that Yuna joked exactly like that, with a deadpan expression and words that left you unsure whether to laugh or cry. They began working together. Every evening after Lian finished her daily healing session, Siwoo and Yuna sat down at the table and made plans. Yuna knew the law. Siwoo knew the systems. Together, they devised a strategy. Not a military one, a legal one, a political one, an economic one. 50 residents, that was the goal. Now there were 36 of them. They needed 14 more. The flow of people was steady, 2 or 3 people a week. At this rate, they'd reach 50 in a month and a half. But Siwoo couldn't just wait. He needed quality, not quantity. Every new resident wasn't just a mouth to feed. It was a set of parameters, a set of talents, hidden and obvious, and each of them could become an element of the system. Theo, with his luck 6, had already proven it. Gorn, with his strength 7 and mastery of stonework, had proven it. Era, with her farming on barren soil, had proven it. Siwoo began keeping track. Who was coming, what stats they had, what hidden talents, what Solheim needed. He needed a blacksmith, a carpenter, a hunter better than Vald, someone who understands trade, someone who can teach children. On the 85th day since the call to Solheim, a trade caravan approached. Not a small one. 12 wagons, 40 guards. At the head rode a fat man on a red horse. His stats were typical for a merchant. Strength 3, endurance 5, spirit 4, dexterity 6, luck 7, mana 0, high luck and dexterity.
Perfect for someone who lives by deals. His name was Marinville. He traded between the southern provinces and the capital. The route ran through no man's land. He used to bypass Solheim. Now he had made a special detour. Marin was straightforward. He said he'd heard about the healer, that he wasn't interested in healing. He was interested in trade. The free settlement at the crossroads of the southern roads was a trading post. If there was anything to sell in Solheim, he was ready to buy it, and to bring in what was needed. Siwoo looked at him, then at the 12 wagons, then back at Marin. He asked what Solheim needed most. Without a pause, Marin listed them off: tools, cloth, salt, iron, seeds, medicine, everything that can't be obtained from barren land. Siwoo asked what Solheim could offer. Marin smirked. He said that Solheim could offer the most valuable thing on the southern trade route: a safe stop, water, shelter, and a healer who would patch up his guards after skirmishes with the creatures of the abyss. On every trip, he loses 1 or 2 men to their wounds. If Lian would treat his caravan guards between trips, Marin would provide Solheim with everything it needed. For free, because living guards are worth more than any merchandise. Siwoo thought for 30 seconds. Then he held out his hand. Marin shook it. Solheim's first business deal. Lian healed 3 wounded caravanners that very evening, one with a cut on his thigh from the claws of an infected lynx. The second had broken ribs from falling off a wagon. The third had a chronic leg ulcer that hadn't healed in 6 months. Golden light, 3 minutes for each. The caravanners looked at their healed wounds and couldn't believe their eyes. Marin stood to the side, counting in his head. Siwoo could see it on his face. The merchant was calculating his profit. A healer who cures in minutes what takes ordinary doctors weeks. 3 guards were back in action in a single evening. That's a saving Marin estimated at hundreds of gold pieces per trip. The caravan left in the morning. It left behind 4 sacks of salt, 2 rolls of cloth, a box of iron nails, a set of carpentry tools, and a promise to return in 3 weeks. Siwoo stood at the gate and watched the wagons drive off down the southern road. Yuna stood beside him. She said that Marin would tell every merchant along the way about Solheim, that in a month, caravans would be coming here regularly, that this was good for the economy and bad for security. More people know, more people talk, more ears are listening, including the Order's ears. Siwoo nodded. He knew, but they had no choice. Solheim couldn't grow in isolation. It needed resources from outside, and resources meant contacts, and contacts meant visibility. A vicious circle. The stronger they became, the more attention they attracted. The more attention they attracted, the more they needed strength. He told Yuna they needed 50 residents as soon as possible. Yuna said she knew a place where they could bring people from, quickly, in large numbers. The priestess uttered a single word: the arena. In the province of Garland, 3 days' journey to the east, there is an arena, a fighting pit where slaves battle. Not all slaves are human. Some of them are beastmen, half-breeds, those whom the world considers even lower than ordinary servants, those whose stats are used to entertain the crowd. Strength 18, Spirit 1. The perfect, mindless fighting machine. No will,
no rights. Yuna said there are about 30 slaves in the arena right now. 10 of them are beastmen. The conditions are such that half won't survive until winter. If Siwoo wants people who will follow him without question, there's no better place to find them. Siwoo looked at her. He asked if she was suggesting this out of strategy or out of mercy. Yuna answered without batting an eye. She said that one doesn't exclude the other. The Garland Province Arena stood on the outskirts of Red Hall, an oval-shaped stone building, 3 tiers of stands, a sand pit in the center, bars surrounding the pit, cells behind the bars, slaves in the cells. Siwoo walked alone along the road toward the city. Lian had stayed in Solheim. Yuna too. He took no one with him, because what he was about to do required neither a healer nor a lawyer. It required only one thing: eyes that see numbers. He entered Red Hall at dawn. The city was bigger than Vern, 10 times bigger. Stone houses, paved streets, a market in the central square. Guards at the gates with strength ratings of 8 to 10. Serious level. This was no village. This was a provincial capital. The arena was located on the eastern outskirts. Admission cost 2 copper coins. Siwoo paid with the money Marin had left for treating the caravan drivers. Inside, it smelled of sweat and blood and cheap wine. The stands were half empty. Morning fights were for the most devoted spectators, those for whom the evening fights weren't enough. Siwoo sat in the upper tier. From here he could see the pit, and the cages behind the bars, and the stats of every creature below. He began to read. First cage, a human man, strength 9, endurance 6, spirit 2. Slave fighter, a typical build, high strength, average endurance, low spirit. A fighting machine, nothing unusual. Second cell, human woman, strength 7, endurance 8, spirit 3, same type. Third cell, beast man, a man with wolf ears and a tail, strength 15, endurance 11, spirit 1, a single point of spirit, just like that infected wolf in the forest, but this one wasn't infected. He was born that way, or he was made that way. Siwoo looked deeper. Hidden status, spirit suppression, artificial. Someone had deliberately lowered his spirit to 1, so he would fight and not think. Fourth cell, 5th, 6th. Siwoo read them one by one. 32 slaves, 12 beastmen. Every beastman had the spirit suppression status, artificial. Someone had systematically wiped their minds clean to turn them into perfect fighters. Siwoo felt cold anger rising inside him again. Not new, the same one. It came every time he saw someone breaking a living being for the sake of the system's convenience. He went through all the rows of cells. He memorized every set of parameters, every hidden talent, every block, every trauma. And then he saw her, the last cell in the far corner, small, darker than the rest. A girl sat behind the bars. No, a girl, about 17, with wolf ears pressed against her head, with a gray tail wrapped around her knees, with eyes the color of amber, wild, angry, frightened. Her stats hit Siwoo like a fist. Strength 18, endurance 14, agility 16, mana 2, luck 3, spirit 1. Strength 18. 18. It was the highest strength score he had ever seen in a living creature. Higher than any battle priest of the Order. Higher than the commanders of the Imperial Army. With that much strength, she could have torn the bars apart with her bare hands. But she didn't, because spirit won. She didn't understand what she was capable of. She wasn't aware of her own power. She acted on instinct. She fought when ordered. She stopped when ordered, like an animal. Hidden parameters. Siwoo read them, and his throat tightened. Trauma. Systematic abuse since childhood. Suppression of the spirit. Artificial. Suppression level critical. Hidden talent. Animal instincts. Blocked. True name: Tani Haval. Age: 17. Time in the arena: 9 years. They took her at 8. 9 years in a cage. 9 years of fighting. 9 years with her spirit suppressed to a single point. She didn't know words, didn't know concepts, didn't know she had the right to say no, or it hurts, or I don't want to, because no one had ever told her that. Siwoo sat in the stands and watched her through the bars. She didn't see him. She sat curled up in a corner, licking a scrape on her arm, like a wolf cub. He stood up. He went downstairs. He found the arena owner's office. A thick door. 2 guards. Average stats. Strength 8. The arena owner sat at a desk, bald, red-faced, with gold rings on his fingers. Stats. Strength 4. Endurance 6. Spirit 3. Agility 5. Luck 8. Mana 0. High luck. This man was a lucky guy. His business thrived not because he was smart, but because he was lucky. The bets paid off. His competitors went bankrupt.
Slaves were cheap and fought well. Luck 8 is almost the maximum. With that much luck, he could slip on the stairs and fall onto a sack of gold. Siwoo sat down across from him. The owner's name was Gran. Gran asked what he wanted. Siwoo said he wanted to buy slaves. Gran laughed. He said slaves weren't for sale. They generated revenue in the arena. Selling a fighter was like selling a goose that laid golden eggs. Why would he? Siwoo had expected that answer. He wasn't planning to buy any. He intended to use the information. He told Gran that he could see things, that he could determine which fighter in the next match would get injured, which one would win, which one would lose. Not guessing. Exactly. Gran narrowed his eyes. He asked where such confidence came from. Siwoo asked for 5 minutes. Let Gran name a couple of fighters for the next match, and Siwoo would say who would win and how. Gran looked at him appraisingly. Then he shrugged. He named 2 fighters, number 7 and number 12. Siwoo had already seen their stats. Number 7, male, strength 11, stamina 9, agility 4, luck 2. Number 12, male, strength 9, stamina 7, agility 7, luck 5. On paper, number 7 was stronger. Most would bet on him. But Siwoo saw something else. Number 7 had a hidden injury to his left knee. An old one, healed. But with a sharp turn, the knee could give out. And agility 4 meant he was slow. Number 12 was weaker in raw strength, but faster and luckier. Luck 5 versus luck 2. In a fight where both get tired and make mistakes, luck decides the outcome. Siwoo said number 12 would win. In the 3rd round, number 7 would pivot on his left leg and his knee would give out. He would fall. Number 12 would finish him off. Gran snorted. The fight began an hour later. Siwoo watched from the stands. 1st round. Number 7 pressed with force. Number 12 dodged. 2nd round. Both were tired. Number 7 slowed down. Number 12 kept moving. 3rd round. Number 7 tried to get a hold. He spun on his left leg. His knee cracked. He staggered, fell to one knee. Number 12 struck. The fight was over. Gran stood by the pit's railing. He looked at Siwoo. His face had changed. Greed. Siwoo saw it not in his stats, in his eyes. Gran approached him after the fight. He asked how much Siwoo wanted for his predictions. Siwoo said he didn't want money. He wanted slaves. 1 slave for every correct prediction. Gran thought for 5 seconds. Then he held out his hand. They struck a deal. 3 days, 12 fights, 12 predictions. 11 correct. 1 wrong because one of the fighters was under the influence of a stimulant that temporarily boosted his strength by 3 points. Siwoo hadn't accounted for the chemical interference. He remembered the mistake. For the future. 11 correct predictions out of 12. Gran was thrilled. He placed bets on the fights Siwoo predicted and earned more in 3 days than he had in the previous month. He gave Siwoo 11 slaves. Siwoo chose specific ones, those whose attributes Solheim needed. A mason, a carpenter, 2 hunters, a cook with a talent for herbalism, 3 beastmen with suppressed spirits. For the last one, he asked for Tani. Gran refused. Tani was his biggest star, an invincible she-wolf. People came to see her. She was his biggest moneymaker. Siwoo didn't argue. He said he would make 1 more prediction, but not about the fight, about Gran personally. Gran grew wary. Siwoo looked at his stats. Luck 8. But next to luck, A line flickered that Gran had never seen and could not see. Hidden status. Peak of luck passed. Downward curve. Siwoo knew what that meant. Luck, as a stat, was not constant. It fluctuated. It rose and fell. Gran had been at the peak his whole life. But the peak was ending. The curve was going down. Siwoo told Gran that his luck would soon turn, that the next 6 months would be worse than the previous 10 years, that the bets would start to lose, that fighters would start getting injured, that inspections would start coming more often. He wasn't threatening him. He was describing the math. Gran turned pale. He was superstitious. All people with high luck are superstitious, because they sense their luck on an instinctual level. And when someone tells them it's leaving, they believe it. Siwoo said that Tani was his price, for silence, and for one piece of advice on how to survive a slump. Gran handed Tani over an hour later. The documents for 12 slaves were signed by evening. Siwoo left Red Hall with a column of 12 people. 11 walked in silence, with their heads bowed. Solheim greeted them with rain, light, cold, autumnal. The gates were open. Horn stood at the entrance with his arms crossed, watching the column of 12 dirty, ragged people led by a skinny, unarmed young man. He said nothing. He just nodded and stepped aside. Lian was waiting in the square. Yuna stood next to her. Lian saw the former slaves, and her hands glowed gold before she had time to think. Reflex. Her body reacted to another's pain. Siwoo stopped the column in the square. He looked at the 12 people standing before him, unsure of what to do. 9 years in the arena, 6 years in slavery, 8 years in a cage. Each had their own number, their own prison. He said briefly that they were free, that there were no more chains, that if they wanted to leave, the door was open. If they wanted to stay, there was shelter and food. No one is forcing them. No one is giving orders. He turned and went into the house. He left them in the square, on purpose, because the first thing a slave needs is a moment without a master, a moment when no one is watching, when you can just stand there and breathe and not wait for an order. Yuna came out to them 10 minutes later. She handed out blankets. She showed them the empty houses. She explained where the well was and where the outhouse was. She spoke evenly, calmly, without pity. Yuna didn't know how to feel pity. She knew how to help. Those are different things. Lien began her examinations the next day. 12 people, each with a whole host of problems. Old fractures, scars, infections, internal organ damage from blows. She treated 2 or 3 people a day. Siwoo wouldn't allow more. The order's restriction was still technically in effect, but Siwoo decided to take the risk. The new residents were a medical necessity, not a commercial activity. If the order asked, he was ready to explain. By the end of the week, all 12 were healthy, physically. Mentally, it was more complicated. Most of the former slaves didn't speak. They sat in their designated houses. They only came out for meals. They flinched at loud noises. They didn't make eye contact. 9 years in the arena had done things to these people that weren't visible from the outside. It was inside, in their eyes, in the way a person held their hands, always in front of them, ready to shut themselves off. Siwoo didn't intrude on them. He didn't comfort them. He didn't question them. He waited. And while he waited, he dealt with Tani. Tani was a separate problem. She didn't behave like a human. She behaved like a beast. She ate with her hands. She growled when someone got too close. She slept on the floor, curled up in a ball. She didn't use the bed. She didn't understand the concept of a bed. 9 years in a cell with no furniture, a stone floor and straw. She was the strongest being in Solheim, strength 18. If she wanted to, she could kill Gorn with a single blow, tear down the fort's wall with her bare hands, rip chains apart like paper. But her spirit one meant she wasn't aware of it.
She didn't plan. She didn't dream. She didn't want to. She existed. She ate. She slept. She fought when provoked. That was all. Siwoo spent an hour with her every day. He didn't speak. He just sat nearby, 3 paces away, on the ground, in silence. At first, Tawny growled. Then she stopped. Then she began to glance at him, warily. On the 4th day, she sniffed him. She approached. She leaned in. She took a deep breath. She backed away. Information received. Scent memorized. On the 5th day, Siwoo brought her some cooked meat. He didn't throw it.
He didn't set it down in front of her. He sat down next to her. He placed his portion on the rock between them. He began to eat his, slowly. Tanya watched. Then she took the meat from the rock. She ate beside him, not across from him, beside him. On the 7th day, Siwoo spoke, not to her, out loud, as if talking to himself. He said that the sky was gray today and that it would probably rain tomorrow. Tawny didn't answer, but her ears turned toward him. She was listening. On the 10th day, he said her name was Tawny, that it was a beautiful name. Tawny looked at him, for the first time, straight on. Not from the side, not warily, straight on. Amber eyes into his eyes. She said nothing, but something in her gaze had changed, as if somewhere very deep inside, a door had creaked open. Siwoo checked her parameters. Spirit 1, no changes. Spirit suppression still active. But next to the suppression, a new line flickered, faint, barely visible. Potential for recovery, minimal. The suppression was artificial, external, like a dam on a river. Tanya's spirit wasn't naturally low. It had been suppressed. And if the pressure were removed, it would begin to grow on its own. But Siwoo couldn't lift the suppression the same way he had removed the blockage from Yuna. There had been a magical seal that could be weakened. Here, it was something else. Chemical. He looked deeper. He found it. A hidden condition. Poisoning with a spirit-suppressing potion. Chronic. 9 years. They had been giving her the potion, every day, for 9 years. A potion that suppressed her spirit to a minimum. It turned a person into an obedient animal. In the arena, this is standard practice. They add it to the beast people's food. They don't know. They don't feel it. They just don't think. They just fight. They just exist. Siwoo felt the cold anger inside him turn to ice. Not hot rage. Ice. Pure. Sharp. Precise. He went to Kel. The old herbalist was sorting through her supplies in a small room by the forge. He asked if she knew what a spirit-suppressing potion was. Kel's face darkened. She said she knew, that it was a banned substance. Officially, unofficially, it was used in arenas and in military camps. A simple formula. 3 components. Black willow root, moonstone powder, blood of the abyss lizard. Daily use suppresses the spirit to a minimum. Discontinuing use causes a slow recovery. Very slow. Months, sometimes years. It depends on the duration of the poisoning. 9 years. Siwoo asked how long recovery would take. Kel shook her head. She didn't know. Maybe 6 months, maybe a year, maybe never. 9 years is a long time. The spirit might be irreversibly damaged. Siwoo returned to Tanya. He sat down next to her. She wasn't growling. She was used to it. He looked at the suppression bar, at the recovery potential bar, and thought. If the potion stopped flowing, the body would start cleansing itself. Slowly, but it would start. And every day without the potion, the spirit would rise by a tiny fraction. He couldn't speed up the process with his ability. The suppression was chemical, not parametric. He could change the numbers, but couldn't change the body's chemistry. But he could do something else. He could prepare the ground. He looked at Tanya's other parameters. Power 18. Enormous, excessive for someone whose spirit is growing. When the spirit begins to recover, Tanya Ni would begin to become aware of herself. And awareness of strength 18 without control is dangerous. For her, for those around her. She needs balance. It is necessary that when the spirit reaches a certain point, the other parameters be ready. He could not redistribute her stats. She did not trust him. There was no bond of summoning. Even that subtle trust that had allowed Yuna to be partially unlocked didn't work here.
Tanya didn't know what trust was. She needed to learn what choice was first. That's why Siwoo decided not to touch her parameters at all. Not a single point, not a single redistribution, not until she asked him to. He told her this out loud, sitting next to her on the ground, looking up at the sky, as if he were talking to the clouds. He said she had power, a lot of power, more than anyone else in this fort, and that he could make her even stronger. But he wouldn't, because it was her body, her numbers, her life. And changing something in someone else's life without permission was the same thing they'd done to her in the arena, only without the chains. Tani didn't answer, but her ears were pricked. She listened to every word. Siwoo stood up and left. He left her alone. Yuna was waiting for him in the square. She said that the population of Solheim had reached 48 people.
2 had arrived while he was gone, a wandering blacksmith out of work and his wife. 2 more, and there would be 50. The threshold for autonomy. Siwoo nodded. He asked Yuna if she was ready for what would happen when they declared autonomy. Yuna replied that she was ready, that the documents were drafted, that the wording had been carefully checked, that every clause of the declaration was based on a specific article of the code, that their position was strong from a legal standpoint. But she added that legal power was one thing, real power was another. The order could ignore the law. Empires could ignore the law. If they decided that Solheim was too dangerous, no clause of Section 203 will stop the punitive squad. Siwoo said he knew that they need not only legal protection, but also military protection. That they have Tani with a strength of 18, but no control. They have Horn with a strength of 7, but he's an old man. They have guards made up of former slaves, but they need to be rehabilitated and trained. They need someone who can train them. We need a tactician. We need a strategist. Yuna said she could teach. Spirit 14 and Mana 11, that's not just knowledge of the law. She's a top-tier warrior priestess. The temple taught her to fight before it taught her to pray. She doesn't like fighting, but she knows how. Siwoo looked at her with a new expression. Yuna shrugged. She said that being a heretic doesn't mean weak. It means troublesome. The next day, 2 people approached the gates of Solheim, a man and a woman, not young, with sacks on their shoulders. They said they had walked for 3 days from the nearest village, that they had heard of a place that takes everyone in, where they don't look at the numbers on your wrist. They showed theirs. The man's total was 11, the woman's was 9, the bottom of the barrel, the absolute bottom of the hierarchy. In any city, they would have been given a spot by the trash heap. In any village, they would have been thrown scraps. They had walked for 3 days to reach a place where they would be accepted as human beings. Siwoo looked at them, at their weary faces, at their worn-out feet, at the sacks of pitiful belongings. He said, "Welcome to Solheim." 50. Yuna stood beside him. She pulled a rolled-up parchment from her belt, the Declaration of Autonomy. She looked at Siwoo. He nodded. That evening, all 50 residents gathered in the square. Gorn, Ira with the children, Theo, Kel, Wald, Rin, Dora. No, Dora stayed in Verna. Marin isn't here, he's a merchant. 12 former slaves. Tani stood off to the side by the wall. Yuna, Leanne, and everyone else who had arrived over the past few months. Siwoo stepped into the center of the square. He didn't give speeches, he wasn't good at it. He said briefly that there were 50 of them today, that according to the ancient law of this world, they had the right to declare Solheim a free city. That this meant one thing. There would be no hierarchy based on numbers here. Here, a person was worth as much as what they did, not as much as what was written on their wrist. Yuna read the declaration in a clear voice, without emotion. Every word was precise. Every phrase was backed by a reference to the code. The free city of Solheim, an autonomous settlement on no man's land, the right to self-governance, the right to their own interpretation of the code of parameters, the right to defend their borders. People listened. Not everyone understood the legal terminology, but everyone understood the main point, that from this day forward, they were neither vagabonds nor outcasts. They were residents of a free city, with rights, with the protection of the law. Let this law have been written 300 years ago and forgotten by all.
It is still in effect. Leanne stood next to Siwoo. Her hands glowed gold, not from the treatment, from excitement. The light on her fingers reacted to emotions, and now the square was full of emotions. Hope, fear, joy, uncertainty, all together, all at once. Horn raised his hand, a large hand, a strong hand, a healed hand. He said that he had laid the first stone of these walls 40 years ago, and that if Solheim had become a city, he wanted to be the one to lay the stones anew. Theo raised his hand, then Era, then Kel. One after another, 50 hands. Tani didn't raise hers. She stood by the wall and watched, but she didn't leave. Siwoo looked out at the square, at the 50 people with their hands raised, at the torchlight, at the stars overhead, the stars of a foreign world. He thought that in every game he'd balanced, there was a moment when a small starting base gained city status. It was always a turning point, when the game stopped being about survival and started being about building, about politics, about war, about the future. The tutorial was over. Act 1 is over. Act 2 was beginning. The Declaration of Autonomy spread across the continent in 3 weeks. Marin took a copy north. Caravanners carried rumors east and west. By the end of the 4th month since the proclamation, the free city of Solheim was being discussed in the taverns of the 7 empires. And not all the talk was favorable. The Empire of Veilorn was the first to react. Not with an army, with a letter. A courier in a blue cloak brought a parchment bearing the seal of the imperial court. Yuna opened it and read it aloud. The Empire of Veilorn does not recognize the Declaration of Autonomy. A settlement in no man's land has no legal basis to invoke Article 203, as this article applies only to settlements that existed prior to the adoption of the code. The free city of Solheim constitutes an illegal land grab and is subject to dissolution. Residents are advised to leave the territory within 40 days. Yuna finished reading and neatly folded the letter. She said that Valor was bluffing. Paragraph 203 contains no stipulation regarding the date of the settlement's founding. This is a contrived restriction, legally null and void, but politically dangerous. If one empire refused, the others would follow suit, not because they agreed, because they didn't want to set a precedent. A free city where people aren't judged by their stats isn't a legal problem. It's an ideological bomb. If Solheim survived, every person with low stats in every empire would ask one question: why can't I live the same way? The Council of 7 could not allow this. Siwoo read the letter twice. Then he looked at the date. 40 days. In 40 days, they must either leave or prepare for those who will come for them. He convened a council. Not the Council of 7, the Council of Solheim. Yuna, Leanne, Horn, Theo, Kel, Wald, and Tani. He called her for the first time. She stood by the wall and listened. Silently. But she listened. Yuna explained the situation. Veilorn won't attack alone. The empires act collectively through the Council of 7. A decision to forcibly disband the order must be made by all 7. That's the procedure. A vote. Debates. At least 2 months. That's the good news. The bad news is that the Order of Pure Measure can act independently. The Order does not answer to the empires. It answers directly to the Temple of Velesta. And if Grand Inquisitor Kalev Orn decides that Solheim is heresy, he doesn't need the Council of 7's permission. He'll come himself. Horn asked how many people the Order had. Yuna answered without hesitation. 3,000 warrior priests, 800 inquisitors, 200 senior interrogators, 1 Grand Inquisitor, against 52 residents of Solheim, of whom at most 20 are combat-ready. Silence. A long silence. A heavy one. Theo swallowed. Horn clenched his fists. Kel shook her head. Siwoo looked at the faces of the people around him and saw fear. Not in their expressions, in their eyes. He said he wasn't going to fight 3,000 priests, that they would lose the war on the first day. But war could be avoided. The order follows procedure. First, an inspection, then charges, then a tribunal, then a verdict, then execution. Each stage takes time. Each stage can be contested, dragged out, delayed. And while they drag their feet, Solheim grows. Every day a new resident. Every week a new wall. Every month a new trade route. The more people depend on Solheim, the harder it is to destroy it. Not because the army is stronger, because the cost of destruction is higher. Yuna added that they have another trump card, the law. The Declaration of Autonomy remains formally in effect until overturned by a tribunal. And a tribunal cannot be convened without the consent of all 7 empires. As long as even one of the 7 has doubts, the tribunal is blocked. She needs one empire, one that will support Solheim, or at least abstain. Siwoo asked who. Yuna said there was one option, the Empire of Valorn, the very one that sent the letter. Valorn is not a monolith. There are factions within it, the military, the merchants, and the royal family. The king is old and ill. He has 3 heirs, an eldest son, a middle son, and a youngest daughter, the 3rd princess, Eris Valorn. Yuna knew of her from the temple reports. Eris was a problem for the empire. Intelligent, educated, politically savvy. She spoke 7 languages, but useless, because she was a woman, and because her stats weren't what was valued in the military aristocracy. Strength 3, Endurance 4, Spirit 12, Mana 7, Dexterity 6, Luck 4, Spirit 12, and Mana 7 for a princess is a disgrace. Not a disgrace of talent, a disgrace of direction. In the Valor Empire, strength was valued, physical strength, brutal strength, swords and fists. A princess with Spirit 12 is a scholar princess, a diplomat princess, a princess who is useless on the battlefield and, therefore, useless in general. She was married off to the 50-year-old Duke of Thorn, an alliance that the empire's southern flank. Ares wasn't asked. Ares had no say. Ares was a resource, like gold in the treasury, like grain in the granary. Yuna said that, to her knowledge, the wedding was scheduled for a month from now, and that if Eris was looking for a way out, Solheim could be that way out. Siwoo looked at Yuna. He asked if she was suggesting they grant asylum to a fugitive princess of the empire who had just demanded their disbandment. Yuna nodded. Exactly. A princess in Solheim is a shield. Valorn won't attack a city where their own blood lives, not because they love her, because it's a scandal, because it's humiliating. A princess ran away from her wedding to the outcasts. It's a story that will be retold for 100 years.
Valorn would rather abstain in a council vote than allow such a disgrace. Siwoo said it was a dangerous plan. Yuna said they had no safe plans. Siwoo thought about it for 3 days. On the 2nd day, Tani came to him, for the first time, on her own, not to sit beside him, not for a meal. She came and stood before him, looked him in the eyes, for a long time. Then she said one word, the first word she had spoken since arriving in Solheim. She said, defend. Not a question, a statement. She came to say she would protect this fort, these people, him. Spirit won, but she spoke a word, her own word, chosen by herself. Siwoo looked at her stats. Spirit 1 flickered. It became 1.3, a tiny increase, barely noticeable. But the first, her recovery potential had increased. The chemical suppression was weakening, and that single spoken word, that single choice, had accelerated the process. Siwoo nodded. He said thank you. Tani turned and left. Her tail swayed. Once. Left to right. A small gesture, almost imperceptible. But Yuna, who was standing by the door, saw it, and said quietly that wolves wag their tails like that when they're happy. Siwoo wrote a letter. Yuna helped draft it. 3 lines. Addressed to the 3rd princess, Eris Valorn. The message was simple. The free city of Solheim offers refuge to any person of any rank or origin. The door is open in both directions. The letter was sent with Meron's next caravan. Meron didn't ask what was inside. Meron was a merchant. He delivered goods, and he kept quiet. That was why he was valued. The reply arrived 12 days, not by letter, in person. Eris Valorn arrived riding a black stallion in simple traveling clothes, without coats of arms or an escort.
with a single bag on her saddle and a sword at her belt. She dismounted at the gate. She looked at the walls that Horn had repaired, at Era's garden beds, at the children playing by the well, at Tanya, who was sitting on the roof of the tower, looking down at her. Then she looked at Siwoo. She said she had run away from her wedding, that Duke Thorn had woken up that morning to find an empty bedroom and a note, that they were probably already coming after her. Eris changed Solheim differently than Yuna. Yuna provided the law. Eris provided the structure. In the first week, she compiled a registry of residents, a skills census, a resource map, a duty roster, a division of responsibilities. Everything that Siwoo kept in his head, she put down on paper and organized on shelves. She did it at a frightening speed. 7 languages, a diplomatic education, 24 years at court. She knew how management systems worked because she had grown up inside one of them. Siwoo watched her work and thought he had met his other self, only from another world. He saw numbers, she saw structures. He balanced characters, she balanced organizations. Together, they were a formidable pair. 3 days after Ares Solheim's arrival, he got what he'd been missing. A system, not a parametric one, a functional one. Every person in their place, not because their stats fit, but because their skills fit. Gorn is in charge of construction. Era is in charge of provisions. Theo is in charge of scouting and supplies. Kel is in charge of medicine and herbs. Wald is in charge of hunting. Yuna is in charge of defense and law. Eris is in charge of administration and diplomacy. Leanne is in charge of healing. Siwoo is in charge of everything else. Eris hadn't slept for the first 3 nights. Siwoo saw the light in her window until dawn. On the 4th night, he knocked on her door. She opened it, pale, dark circles under her eyes. Her hair was pulled back into a messy bun. Behind her, the table was piled high with papers. He told her she needed to sleep. Eris gave him a cold stare. She said she wasn't used to being told what to do. Siwoo said he wasn't telling her what to do. He was observing. That her endurance was 4, and at her current workload she'd collapse in 2 days. That he'd seen this before. People with high spirit and low endurance burn bright and fast. Their brains work themselves to the bone until their bodies give out. Eris fell silent. No one had ever described her problem so precisely, so coldly, so without judgment. She asked if he was a doctor. Siwoo said he was a balancer. Eris didn't understand. He explained, briefly, without going into detail, that he could see people's stats, that he could help optimize them, that he wouldn't change anything without permission. Eris stared at him for 5 seconds. Then she said that if he could see her stats, he must know that her luck was a 4 and she was chronically unlucky with men. It was a joke. The first joke Siwoo had ever heard from her. He didn't laugh, but the corner of his mouth twitched. Eris noticed. She closed the door. He heard her lie down. On the 5th day, Eris came to Siwoo and said she was ready. He asked what for. She said for a conversation about what he actually does. Because she's not stupid. Because a healer with Spirit 6 doesn't heal the way Leanne does. Because a blind heretic doesn't quote the Codex better than an archbishop. Because a wolf girl doesn't start talking after 2 weeks if she's 9 years old. Because behind every little miracle in this town stands a skinny guy with strength 2 who, for some reason, knows more about people than they know about themselves. Siwoo was silent. Then he said he would tell her. Winter came early. 5 months after the call-up, the first snow fell on the walls of Solheim. By that time, the population had reached 87 people. 6 new houses had been built. The smithy was working. The granary was full. 2 wells. The spring to the north was lined with stone, and a canal ran from it to Era's field. Marin went there once every 2 weeks and brought back everything that couldn't be obtained locally. Iron, salt, cloth, news. The news was grim. The Council of 7 was discussing the situation. 4 of the 7 empires advocated for a forceful dissolution. 2 abstained. 1 remained silent. Solven. Everything depended on Solven. If Solven voted for dissolution, that would be 5 out of 7, enough for a legitimate decision. If he abstained, it would be 4 out of 7, not enough.
Eris negotiated with Solvin through intermediaries. Letters went back and forth for weeks. Every word was weighed. Every phrasing was calculated. Yuna helped with the legal side, Siwoo with the analysis. The three worked as a single mechanism. At the same time, Siwoo was working with the team. Lian was growing. Spirit 8 had risen to 9, not through redistribution, through natural growth. Her constant healing practice developed the spirit on its own. Siwoo observed this with professional interest. The parameter system allowed for natural growth, slow, by fractions of a unit per month, but growth nonetheless. The whole world believed that the parameters were unchangeable, that the ceiling was set at birth. That was almost true. Almost. The growth was so slow that an ordinary person wouldn't notice it in a lifetime. But Siwoo saw the fractions, tenths, hundredths, and he saw that Lian's fractions were growing faster than others. Because she did what she loved, because she healed every day, and every healing was an act of faith in herself. Faith moved the numbers. Slowly, but it moved them. That was more important than any redistribution. Yuna was growing too. True sight was being restored, layer by layer. Siwoo removed the blockages once a week, one layer at a time. By the 5th month, she could see people's parameters, not as clearly as Siwoo, blurred, outlined, but she could see, with her one remaining eye. It was a painfully ironic sight. The woman who had had her eye gouged out for seeing the truth now saw the truth better than those who had blinded her. Yuna didn't talk about it. But Siwoo noticed that in the evenings she would sit on the tower for a long time and gaze at the stars with her one eye, and she would smile. Tani was changing faster than anyone else. Her spirit had risen to 2.7 in 2 months without the potion. Kel said it was inexplicably fast, that after 9 years of poisoning, recovery should take years. Siwoo knew why. Because Tani made a choice every day. A small one, a tiny one, but a choice. To get up in the morning and leave the house. To eat breakfast at the table instead of on the floor. To say one word, then 2, then 3. Every choice pushed spirit upward, like pebbles on a scale, one by one, but they added up. In the 6th week after arriving in Solheim, Tanya spoke her first 2-word sentence. "It's cold today." Lian stood nearby, and her lips trembled. She turned away so Tanya wouldn't see her tears, but Tani saw. A wolf's sense of smell. She walked up to Lian and clumsily bumped her forehead against her shoulder. A gesture of comfort. A wolf's. The only one she knew. Lian hugged her. Tani froze, tensed up, then relaxed. The first hug of her life. Mira arrived in Solheim in the middle of winter. A 16-year-old girl with a backpack twice her size. Red hair sticking out in all directions. Freckles. A freckled face. A wide smile that never faded for a second. She barged through the gate and asked loudly if it was true that there was a smithy here. Her stats surprised Siwoo. Strength 4, Endurance 3, Spirit 7, Mana 4, Dexterity 9, Luck 6. Dexterity 9 for a 16-year-old girl is exceptional. The hands of a jeweler. The hands of a surgeon. The hands of a master. A hidden talent. Resonant forging. The ability to weave intent into metal, to create objects that are not merely functional, but attuned to their owner, weapons that adapt to the hand, armor that learns its master's movements, tools that improve with every day of use. Mira was a blacksmith, the last of the Hammerson line. Her family had forged weapons for 400 years, but blacksmithing in this world was determined by strength. You need strength to swing a hammer. Strength 4 for a blacksmith is a death sentence. Her grandfather was respected. Her father was tolerated. She herself was cast out. The forge was taken away because of debts. She wandered the southern provinces with a backpack full of tools, looking for a place where she would be allowed to work. Everywhere she went, she was turned away. Strength 4. Not serious. Siwoo looked at her and saw what he always saw. A flawed build. A talented person in whom the world had invested points in the wrong places. Strength 4 is useless for a blacksmith. But Dexterity 9 and a hidden talent for resonant forging are a whole different story. This isn't a blacksmith who swings a hammer. This is a master who feels the metal.
She doesn't need brute force, she needs precision. And she had precision. He led her into the smithy. The forge had a repaired roof and was working. Mira examined the tools. She ran her fingers over the anvil. She closed her eyes. She opened them. She said the anvil was good. Old, but the sound was right. Metal sings if you listen to it. Siwoo asked what she wanted. Mira looked at him in surprise. No one had ever asked before. The order arrived in the 6th month. Not an inspector, not an interrogator. The army. 200 warrior priests in white robes, 4 senior interrogators, and at the front, on a white horse, a man whose stats made Siwoo grab the tower's railing. Strength 19, endurance 16, spirit 15, mana 14, agility 11, luck 7. The Grand Inquisitor Kalev Orn, the Order's strongest fighter, one of the 10 strongest people on the continent, a man who could single-handedly destroy Solheim, along with all its inhabitants and walls, and still make it back in time for dinner. 200 priests lined up in a semicircle before the gates. They did not attack. They waited. Kalev Orn dismounted. He removed his helmet. His face was older than Siwoo had expected. About 50 years old. Deep wrinkles, gray temples, gray eyes. Calm, not angry, tired. These were not the eyes of a fanatic. These were the eyes of a man who had believed in one thing his whole life and had come to a place where his faith had collided with something he could not explain. Siwoo descended from the tower. He stepped outside the gates, alone. Lien wanted to go with him. He asked her to stay. Yuna wanted to go. He asked her to stay. Eris stood in the doorway and said it was madness. Tani growled and stepped forward. Siwoo turned and said one word. Wait. He walked out to meet Kalev Orn, a skinny guy in a plain jacket against 200 white cloaks and a living legend. Kalev looked down at him. He was nearly 2 meters tall. Siwoo came up to his chin. Kalev said he hadn't come to fight, that he'd come to understand, that he'd received Verena Sol's report, that he'd read it 3 times, that Verena had written 2 things that kept him awake. First, that the scales showed 0 deviation for the healer whose cures exceeded all norms. Second, that she suspects manipulation but cannot prove it. Kalev said that Verena is never wrong. If she suspects it, then it is so. But suspicion is not proof, and he had come to obtain proof, or to be convinced otherwise. He proposed a conversation, without weapons, without witnesses, just him and Siwoo, one-on-one. Siwoo agreed. They left the army. They sat on rocks by a stream half a kilometer from the walls. 2 people, one with total parameters of 97, the other with total parameters of 15. Kalev spoke first. He asked directly, "Does Siwoo alter people's parameters?" Siwoo paused. Then he made up his mind. He said yes. Kalev didn't flinch, didn't stand up, didn't reach for his sword. He nodded, as if he'd received confirmation of what he already knew. He asked how. Siwoo explained, briefly, without going into the details of the ability. He said he saw the parameters as a system, that the system was imperfect, that there were errors in it, that he corrected them. He didn't break them. He didn't destroy them. He corrected them. Kalev listened. His expression didn't change. When Siwoo finished, Kalev was silent for a long time. A stream murmured between them. Then Kalev spoke. He said he had served Veleste for 40 years, that he believed in the sanctity of the parameters, that the parameters were order. Without them, the world would collapse into chaos. People are not equal. That is a fact. The parameters give everyone their place. A servant serves because he was born to serve. A warrior fights because he was born to fight. This is not cruelty. This is structure. Without it, civilization will fall apart. Siwoo listened. Then he asked one thing. He asked what spirit Kalev had at birth. Kalev frowned. He answered, Spirit 8. Siwoo nodded. He said that Kalev's spirit was now 15, a growth of 7 units over 50 years. Natural. Through faith and service, the system allowed for growth, slow,
almost imperceptible, but it allowed it. This meant that the ceiling at birth was not absolute. It was a starting point, not a final one. Kalev froze. Siwoo continued. He said he could see the parameters of every priest in the army behind the wall. For most of them, the current values differed from the baseline. By fractions, by units, they had all grown. Through training, through faith, through service. If changing parameters is heresy, then every priest of the Order of Pure Measure is a heretic, including the Grand Inquisitor himself. Silence. A long one. Kalev looked at Siwoo. His gray eyes were unmoving. Then he said quietly, "What if Siwoo is right? Then everything he believed in is a lie." Siwoo shook his head. He said, "No, not a lie. One of the patches, a system someone created 300 years ago. Not perfect, but it works. It helped." The year passed like one long exhalation. Solheim had grown to 812 residents. The walls stood firm. Horn led 20 masons. Era's fields fed the entire city, and there was a surplus for trade. Mira forged her first real sword. Adaptive, alive, adapting to its owner. 3 empires sent trade representatives. Marin became a regular supplier and an unofficial ambassador. The forge worked around the clock. A school for children opened in the former barracks. Kell trained herbalists. Wald led a hunting party of 12 men. Theo, with his eternal luck 6, found a silver vein in the hills to the north. Solheim became a city not in name, but in substance. The tribunal was scheduled for spring. Yuna had been preparing the defense for 8 months, 200 pages of documents, testimony from 120 people, references to every applicable section of the code, precedents, arguments, counter-arguments. Eris secured political support. Solvin officially abstained. 4 voted for dissolution. 2 abstained. 1 remained silent. 5 out of 7 was not a quorum. The tribunal was legally weakened even before it began. But it took place anyway, in the capital. In that very hall where, a year ago, Siwoo had lain on the marble floor. The Council of 7, the Grand Inquisitor, archbishops, generals, lords, the entire leadership of the continent had gathered to decide the fate of a small town on the edge of the abyss. Siwoo stood before them, in the same simple jacket, with the same stats, strength 2, endurance 2, spirit 9. Behind him stood 5 women, Lian, spirit 10, mana 7, golden light on her fingers. Regenerative resonance is fully active. In a year, she has healed 417 people. 3 of them were on the brink of death. All 3 are alive. 12 children in 3 provinces have been named in her honor. They call her the goddess of life. She doesn't call herself that. She calls herself Lian. Yuna, spirit 14, mana 11. True sight restored to 70%. With one eye, she sees more than the entire council with both. She crafted a defense that 5 order lawyers couldn't pierce in 3 days of hearings. Tani, spirit 4.2. Growth of 1 unit in 9 months. Impossible by any measure of this world. She spoke in complete sentences. She learned to laugh, once, quietly. When Mira dropped the hammer on her own foot and hopped around the smithy. Strength 18 hadn't gone anywhere, but now there was a mind behind that strength. Not fully developed, growing. A little clearer every day. Eris, spirit 13. Strategic foresight activated 2 months ago. She could see 3 moves ahead, literally, not metaphorically. The evolution slot opened when she first made a decision that the entire Solheim Council considered a mistake, and she turned out to be right. That day, she believed that her mind mattered, and her talent kicked in. Mira, dexterity 10, spirit 8. Resonant forging is fully active. The sword she forged for Tanya adjusted its balance to fit its owner's hand. The shield she made for Gorn grew lighter when the old man grew tired. The knife for Wald always struck a vulnerable spot. Mira laughed more than anyone else in Solheim, and blushed every time Siwoo told her she was doing a great job. And the sixth, the one Siwoo hadn't expected. Jeon Siwoo. She arrived a month before the tribunal, at night, through the wall, with a knife in her hand. A professional assassin, half-blood, luck 1, disposable, sent by one of the empires with orders to kill the balancer before the trial. Siwoo woke up because he sensed a presence. He didn't hear it, he sensed it. Spirit 9 gave him intuition, weak, but enough to open his eyes a second before the knife reached his throat. Sihyun stood over him, black clothes, a mask, gray eyes, empty, like those of a person who had long since ceased to be human. Stats: Strength 8, Endurance 6, Agility 14, Spirit 3, Mana 0, Luck 1. Hidden stats: Trauma, systematic dehumanization since childhood. Hidden talent: Echo sense, the ability to memorize and reproduce any physical movement seen once. Blocked, suppressed by training. They explained to her that she was a tool, that a tool doesn't need talent, it needs obedience. True name: Jeon Siwoo. Sentence: Disposable unit. Expected lifespan as estimated by the client: 2 months.
They hadn't planned to take her back. She was disposable. Siwoo looked up at her. The knife was 10 centimeters from his throat. He spoke quietly. He said he knew why she was here, that he could read it from her parameters, that she had been sent to die. Not to kill, to die. Because no one is waiting for her to return, because her luck 1 means the mission will fail. The client knew this. He sent her not for the result, for the sake of reporting, to check a box. An attempt was made, a disposable asset written off. Sihyun didn't move. The knife hung in the air. Siwoo said the door was open, both ways. If she wanted to strike, he couldn't stop her. Strength 2 against Dexterity 14. No chance. But if she wanted to stay, she could stay. And if she wanted to leave, she could leave. The door was open. The knife dropped, slowly. Sihyun took off her mask. A young face, beautiful, dead. Not a single emotion. She said she didn't understand. Why was he asking her to stay? She had come to kill him. Siwoo said he knew. Sihyun stood silently. Then she sat down on the floor. The knife lay nearby. She said she would stay until morning. Then she would decide. In the morning, she didn't leave, nor the next morning, nor a week later. She didn't explain why, but every morning there was a cup of tea on Siwoo's table. Hot, fresh, brewed exactly the way he liked it. He didn't know when she'd managed to learn his taste. Sihyun knew. It was her way, the only one she had. And now all 6 of them stood behind him in the council chamber. Yuna had led the defense for 3 days. 3 days of questioning, cross-examinations, legal duels. She had dismantled every charge, every single one, point by point, article by article. The code does not prohibit what Leon does. The code does not prohibit Solheim's autonomy. The code does not define the boundary between healing and alteration. The code does not define a natural limit. The code was written 300 years ago and has never been updated to reflect reality. On the 3rd day, Kalev Orn stood up. The chamber fell silent. The Grand Inquisitor spoke in an even voice. He said he had been to Solheim, that he had seen the city with his own eyes, that 800 people live, work, and protect one another not by the dictates of parameters, but by their own choice. That this is not heresy. It is a question to which the Codex offers no answer. And if the Codex offers no answer, then a verdict is impossible. The hall buzzed. The councillors exchanged glances. The archbishops turned pale. Kalev Orn had just sided with Solheim, not openly, not directly, but enough. The vote: 3 for conviction, 2 for acquittal, 2 abstained. There is no majority for conviction. Solheim is acquitted. The hall buzzed like a disturbed beehive. Siwoo stood in the center and breathed, just breathing. Leon was crying beside him. Yuna stood straight with a stony face, but Siwoo could see her hands trembling. Eris looked at her father. The old king sat in the box and looked at his daughter, at the princess he had given to the duke like a possession, who had run away, who had built a free city, who had just won a court case against half the continent. He didn't smile, but he nodded. Once. The proclamation ceremony took place a month later, in Solheim, in the central square. 812 people stood under the open sky. Siwoo stepped into the center. In his hands he held a crown, a simple one, a silver one. Mira had forged it herself.
The metal was warm and alive, like everything she made. He turned to Lian. She stood before him in a white dress that Era had sewn from fabric brought by Meron. Her silvery green hair was loose, her eyes were green, wet, her hands glowed gold. He said that this city was not built by them, that the walls were built by Horn, that the food was grown by Era, that Yuna wrote the laws, that Eris led the strategy, that Mira forged the weapons, that Tani guarded the borders, that Sihan checked the shadows, but that this city began with one person, with a girl who knelt in the recruitment hall and apologized for existing, with a girl who said she wanted to heal so that people would become better, from a girl whose name is now spoken like a prayer in the 12 provinces. He named the city Everfall, in her honor. The Principality of Everfall, the first state in the history of Aetherdella where a person is judged not by numbers, but by who they want to become. He raised the crown. Lian bowed her head. He placed the crown upon her head. The square erupted, not with shouts, with light, golden, warm, alive. The light emanated from Lian, not from her hands, from her entire body. Regenerative resonance at full power. The light rose upward, higher than the walls, higher than the towers, higher than the clouds. For the first time in 300 years, the sky above the southern border cleared. The shadow of the abyss that had hung on the horizon for as long as the elders could remember receded. For a moment. For one moment of clear sky. And in that sky, a face appeared, huge, translucent, feminine. Green eyes, like Lian's, like grass in spring, like hope. Velesta, the goddess of the scales, the creator of the parameter system, she who came into this world from another 300 years ago. She who built a cage of numbers because she thought it was the only way to save people from chaos. She who waited 300 years for someone to show another way. She looked at Siwoo. He looked at her. 800 people stood in silence and saw the face of their goddess for the first time in their lives. Not a single priest, not a single archbishop, not a single grand inquisitor had ever seen Velesta. And she had come to a small town on the edge of the abyss because a skinny guy with power too had done what she could not. He didn't fix the system. He showed that the system didn't have to be a cage. Velesta smiled, for the first time in 300 years. Siwoo saw her stats, far away, blurred, but he saw. And among them, one line burned, the true name, the developer. She was just like him, a misfit from a world where numbers determined everything. She came here and tried to save this world the only way she knew how. She systematized, she organized, she boxed every person into a framework. Because she feared chaos. Because in her world, chaos killed. And for 300 years, she watched as her system slowly suffocated those she wanted to save. She waited. She hoped. She summoned editors one after another. They all burned out. They all tried to edit themselves and burned out. Except for one. The one whose own editor had been blocked. The patch she had sewn in personally. The last hope. Siwoo raised his head. He looked into green eyes the size of a cloud. And silently, with just his lips, he said, "We need to talk about patch notes, Ms. Game Designer." The face in the sky twitched. Her lips moved. Not a single person in the square heard what she said. But Siwoo heard. She said, "Finally." The face dissolved. The sky closed in with clouds. The shadow of the abyss returned to the horizon, but weaker, thinner, as if someone had cracked open a window and let in just enough light to make the darkness retreat a step. One step, the first of many. Leanne stood with a crown on her head. Tears streamed down her cheeks. She was crying just as she had on that first day in the palace corridor when they were cast out, only now for a different reason.